to Standing for Truth. My name is Donnie, and I am your host and moderator for tonight's exciting debate between Charles Jennings and Andrew Griffin on the logos of John 1 person or personification. I'm excited for this debate. We've hosted somewhere about 400 debates, probably on all sorts of topics over the last 4 years, 4 or 5 years. And I don't think we've hosted a debate specifically with this proposition or this topic. Of course, we've debated and engaged the nature of God so many times, but this specific question, person or personification, I'm excited to see what Charles and Andrew are going to bring to the table for tonight's exchange. And before we get into the debate itself, though, let's get acquainted. Let's break the ice a little bit, get to know our guests. Andrew, why don't we start with you? Your first time here on the channel, so it's always great to see a fresh face, a new debater for the Standing for Truth debate platform. So it is a privilege to have you. And how you doing tonight? A little bit about yourself.
Good. Thanks. Yeah, I'm honored to be here. I love the channel. I think it's a very fitting channel for this debate. Um, and my name's Andrew. I am a Unitarian Christian. I have a small YouTube channel called Unitarian Apologetics, where I just apologetically explain the Bible in a way that's more significant that we can apply to our life rather than just being anti-Trinitarian. I just try to explain the Bible as I see it. I love Jesus. I love God. I love talking and thinking about God. And I'm just honored and very glad to be here.
Well, Andrew, I really appreciate that introduction. I do have your channel, Unitarian Apologetics, in the description box for people to see. You're definitely no stranger to debates. You're experienced, and Charles is experienced as well. So these are my favorite kind of debates. I know you guys always come prepared and just well equipped for these kinds of discussions. So, Andrew, I do appreciate that intro. It's great to have you. Charles from the Layman Seminary, good to have you back as well. How have you been? And also a little bit about yourself and your channel.
I'm doing good. This debate's going to be a little bit out of my element, but I feel like that the layman seminary should be able to touch on everything that a seminary touches on, and so it doesn't hurt for me to get challenged in other areas. I kind of feel like I'm dominating in the free grace debates, and Andrew and I will be debating that in the future. So, it's okay to be the underdog sometimes,
Well, Charles, you are going up against someone who's debated the nature of God many times. Isn't that right, Andrew? So I think this is going to be a debate to remember. It's going to be edifying. That's why we do these for the audience. It gets us out of our theological or scientific echo chambers if we're debating a science-related topic, and allows us to engage various views. And that's what we like to do here is provide our audience with a good diversity of topics. And Andrew and Charles actually are participating in a 2-debate series. And so this one is the logos of John, of course, person or personification. And then next month, we're going to go with something in the world of soteriology. So tonight, the nature of God. Next month is free grace biblical. So Andrew and Charles, I really appreciate the time you've offered for these debates. I know how busy you both are. And so it's going to be good. I'll go over the format briefly before we get into opening statements. So we're going to be easygoing with the opening statements. I want to make sure the debaters feel like they got enough time to make their case for tonight. 15 to 17 minutes will do for opening statements. Then we're going to jump into a 10-minute uninterrupted rebuttal, followed by a cross-exam. Cross-exam is going to be 50 minutes, 25 minutes on each side. Then we'll wrap things up with a 5-minute closing statement. Then this is where we get you guys in the audience involved. We're going to have a roughly 25 to 30-minute audience Q&A. And so please, if you have a question for our guest tonight, make sure you're tagging me at Standing for Truth. And let me know who the question is for. Andrew and Charles, I know the live chats can get lively when it comes to these debates, these important debates. So let's make sure we're being professional. Let's make sure we are being respectful to our guest as we attack arguments and not persons. And so, with that, I think we're just going to get right into it. Andrew and Charles, again, I appreciate the introductions. If the audience wants to see more from Andrew and Charles, do check the description box. And Charles, we're going to hand it over to you, as you are more or less taking the affirmative tonight. And so 15 to 17 minutes, I'm getting my timer ready. And I do see your screen being shared. I think we're good to go. Charles, it's coming in.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Let me know when I got like about 30 seconds. Okay, so this right here, you could say that I'm taking on the whole house of Gryffindor because I'm debating Andrew Griffin now, and pretty soon I'm going to be debating Sean Griffin. So just keep that in mind, right? We're going to start a little lighthearted. Right here, these are the people that have debated me. Conditional salvationists on one side, non-free grace, OSS on there, minus the ones in red, which are eschatology. Andrew Griffin is on the conditionalist side, which we'll debate in the future. But with a roster like this, I feel like Michael Jordan in his prime in the free grace debates. But when we're talking about this subject of John 1, this may be more like watching Michael Jordan playing basketball. Baseball. So let's see how that goes. So these are some of the debates that ever I watched in preparation. He debated Dr. Sean Cole. He said that this was his favorite debate. And I'm not surprised because Dr. Sean Cole was talking to him like a professor talking to a student in class. And that's good, but it didn't have the intensity that, say, Shimon or Anthony Rogers. Now, they would not grant personification, if I remember right, in the debate. I'm going to grant it, but I'm going to also argue that it's a person. See, Andrew is a Unitarian. I think at one time he believed that Jesus is God, and that and we'll get into exploring about his views on salvation in the next debate. But so right now he's a Unitarian, and he's going to argue that the Logos is a personification. I'm a Trinitarian who's going to argue that the Logos is also a person. The debate is not really over whether personification is used or not used. I'm going to grant this for the sake of the debate. It's whether the personification explanation means the Logos is not a person. Andrew, the Unitarian, does not believe the Logos is a person. He does not believe the Logos is God. He might not even believe that the Logos became man. So let me frame this debate with Scripture. So if you look at Genesis 22, Job 1, and John 1, they all have something in common. The narrator tells us what's going to happen before things unfold. It says God tested Abraham, so that gives us context. We have Satan mentioned in Job 1, even though Job did not know Satan was involved. And in John 1, we're told Jesus is God in the prologue from the very beginning. So what this means is we can't allow the Muslims to get us with their red letter arguments or other groups that use this. And Andrew may use this. Show me in the Bible where Jesus says he's God. Well, the prologue is telling us he's God. And all the other statements, the sayings and the actions that are recorded in the Gospel of John must be interpreted in light of that prologue as the story unfolds. So when we're talking about the prologue, we have a literary device called an inclusio that lets us know that it's the beginning and the end of the prologue, bookends, if you will. And so you have John 1 and John 1:18. The words in red relate to the word, the Logos, the Son. And then the words in green relate to the Father, and the words in purple relate to the relational language. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Then you see in 1:18, which I believe is the explanation of John 1:1, no one has seen God at any time, this being God the Father. The only begotten God, now there's a textual variant here, so you could say only begotten Son or God, it doesn't matter because both of them are persons. Who's in the bosom of the Father, he has explained to him. In other words, 1:18 is showing us that the Word is a person because this is in parallel with it. Whether you take it as God, which he would reject, or whether you take it as Son, which he would accept, but define it in a different way. The reason he's called the Word is because he's the one that explained him. This word explain is exogeomai in the Greek. It's where we get the word exegesis. Jesus is the exegesis of God. That's why he's called the Word in the very beginning. Now, here's in the Greek if we need to do with this, but this is what I want to point out. God the Father is a person. We know this because theos is being used in the passage about the Father, was with God, God the Father. Then we see 1:18, monogenes theos, And we see theos, as I said, it's a textual variant, but regardless of whether it's theos or the Son, the point is that it's a person we're talking about, and therefore this one is called the Logos / exegesis of God. So in 2003, Muslims gave me this book, and I read it because in it argues that Unitarians are the true Christians and Trinitarians are the false Christians. So my question to Andrew is, why are you not Muslim yet? If you study church history, the areas that did not hold to Trinitarianism, they eventually fell to Islam. So I think that's something to be seriously concerned about. So as I've already talked about, my argument is that the Logos is also a person in deity and person that took on humanity. That's addition, not subtraction. The Logos is the true personification of God. True, like in the true vine. I am the true vine. Even though the vineyard of Israel is referred to, he's the one that best represents the truest form. Personification is where a thing takes on the qualities of a person, or they're being described that. Andrew will point to the Proverbs, the Memra of the Targums, and Philo for proof that there's a personification going on in John 1. Nobody else would grant that. But let me say that if I grant that, I don't think it changes a thing. Let's see if that's true. This argument is my own, so it may fall with me as well. But the thing I want us to think about is which came first, person or personification. I argue that person comes first. There's personhood within God, okay? God created persons. These persons, just as the natural process of things, a child explains the sun going up and they say, oh, he's happy, but the extreme form of this turns into polytheism, animism, and then polytheism. Well, then when you get to the time of the philosophers want to redeem the mythology. So what they start doing is they try to talk about personifications by allegorizing those things. Well, Philo did the same thing with the Old Testament. He didn't like certain things of the Old Testament, and so what he did was he allegorized those things or platonized those things to deal with that. But John is arguing that the person takes on the personifications. The way to think about it is like this, is that you have theophanies and Christophanies, and I know that Andrew would view these differently, but these theophany and Christophanies are preparing the world for the incarnation of the Son. The virgin birth was prepared by supernatural births that led up to it. In the same way, these various personifications that came about in the literature and in the culture was a way to prepare people for the incarnation. Therefore, the truest form of personification is when you say, I'm in the flesh, right? We use that in figurative language. There I am in the flesh. You're going to be there? Yeah, in the flesh. Okay, now this is the step down argument. This is the other side. Perhaps you could call it an argument to absurdity. If you say that Logos is a thing, okay, rather than a person, you run into a problem because it says the word was God. Now, I know that you can make an argument without the article and with, and we can deal with the Greek if we need to. But is he saying that that God is a thing as well? And if God is a thing, is he impersonal? And if God is impersonal, is there no personhood? And if there's no personhood, there cannot be personification. So we'll try to unpack this a little bit. Like I said, this is my argument. A person has attributes. Like we say, that's what I like about you. Attributes lead to personification. In the sinful form, it leads to idolatry. We compare the created thing to like God, having those characteristics. So the polytheism was addressed by the philosophers, like Philo later on. Personifications were used for attributes, like wisdom. God the Son is a person with these personified attributes. God has revealed himself, sort of like the undercover boss shows. He's the one that's able to represent God's plan. And I know that's how Andrew views the Logos, as a plan and not as a person. But he's able to represent it in the fullest way because he's the one that created the plan. See, my argument doesn't technically argue based off of Trinitarianism. I think it could work with modalism. And I think Andrew was a modalist before he slipped into this, but I'm not sure. If the Logos is an impersonal plan, and I don't think it is, and if Logos is God, then God is not even a person. And I think there's problems there. You know, I'm a Trinitarian. I believe God is one essence, yet three persons. So personhood exists within God. God created one human race individually. We could talk about the persons within that race. Person existed before personification did. Personification was when humans describe things as person or having characteristics. Personifications in the Proverbs, Philo, etc., are preparatory for when the one that could represent true personhood came about. But true personhood added humanity to his person. So reversing it, going down the triangle, if personification is a thing being described as a person, the word would be a thing associated with God. But the word is called God. Is God a thing, or is he a person? A thing personified in personhood? In other words, personhood does not begin with humanity. Humans are in the image of the true person. If the image is not personal, then humans cannot be persons. Then there's no such thing as a personification, since there are not characteristics of humans to personify. Okay, so there's that triangle again. That's the thought with that. Now, as I was listening to his debate with Dr. Sean Coe and others, this book by Murray Harris was brought up. This is the 2008 one, and this is the 2015 Exegetical Guide to the Greek New Testament. And so I have the interactions about that and the arguments that we could go into about all of this, but I want to be clear that Murray Harris, as far as I know, is a Trinitarian. I looked at these passages in context. So when he says that theos regularly refers to the Father alone and apparently never to the Trinity, that statement has a context. And I'm still exploring that context, but this is from Jesus as God. When ha theos is used, we are to assume that the New Testament writers have the Father in mind, unless the context makes the sense theos impossible. Then we have the footnote 112 that Andrew referred us to. So when we get to discussing this footnote, what we have is he's talking about that we can't say the Trinity is in the Old Testament, but rather that's a New Testament revelation of God. Then he talks about how the Hebrews 1 distinguishes that theos is talking about the Father because it mentions the Son in the passage. And then after talking about those comparisons, he says at the bottom, it would be inappropriate for Elohim or Yahweh ever to refer to the Trinity in the Old Testament. Why? Because in his view, that's an anachronistic reading. When in the New Testament, theos regularly refers to the Father alone and apparently never to the Trinity. So he's basically saying is that these terms were later on developed and we can't read them in the text. I have no problem with that. I have no problem with saying theos refers to the Father alone. Now, the reason this is significant is because even though theos refers to the Father alone, it's used without the article, which he's going to argue is qualitative, meaning that they share the same essence as the Father. And he gives a translation. So here's the different books. He says, of the 83 uses of theos, the only place where the word could not refer to the Father are 1:1 and 1:18, the very passages we're talking about. And then this is a book that we use in Advanced Greek 1 by Murray Harris, Prepositions and Theology. There could be little doubt that John Theon designates the Father. Here's a summary of the arguments he made in Jesus about that. And then this is what he says here. Having distinguished Logos from the Father, John wished to point that they had in common, namely their Godhood. See, we talked about personhood, but here he's talking about Godhood. The Father and the Son share Godhood. Like the Father and equally with them, the Logos may be included in the category of deity as an inherent partaker in the divine essence. If then a single reason is to be given for their anarthros state of theos, meaning without the article, it is then that the noun is qualitative, indicating the nature of the Logos rather than identifying his person. But in the incidental manner, so he's just talking about how do you know what the subject is. I'm summarizing there. But this is how Harris paraphrases it. We may paraphrase as follows. At the very beginning of creation and time, the Word as the perfect expression of God the Father had already always existed. And this Word was in active communion with God, and the Word inherently shared the same nature as God. So he's arguing that the Word shared the same nature as God. Andrew believes the reason he wants to argue for personification is because he believes that the Logos is a plan. And this plan was implemented whenever the Son was created in humanity. Now, I've already asked the question about why aren't you Muslim? But another question to be asked is, If you believe that Elohim can be used for gods or the supreme God, doesn't that make you a polytheist? And your answer to that is, well, there's a context, a criteria that we determine whether a passage refers to the one true God versus these other forms of God that are being used. And we need to flesh it out, what's going on there. So this is where he's talking about the translation, the word was God, Murray Harris. And he says this: however, we must be aware that God is being used in a distinctive sense, not as a proper noun that refers to the Father or the triune God, but as a generic title that signifies one who inherently shares the nature or essence of God. And then this is from your other debate. You were talking about a definition of God. We got to agree on our definition of God. Well, with the way you wrote this, it could only refer to God the Father, and you're assuming that only one person exists. You want to point to passages about God being all powerful, and then you would want to go to other passages to show that Jesus appears to not be all powerful. Then you would say God is invisible, and you would point that Jesus is visible. But in a Trinitarian concept, or even a modalistic concept, I think you could argue that the theophanies and the Christophanies that ever occurred was always the Son, or in that form. So, like I said, I'm not modalist. I'm just using it both language because of his prior background. So he's talking about Jesus representing God as an agent. Well, this is the thing. Whenever you're evaluating Greek for the question, adverbial relationships of the how, you have means, manner, agency, and instrumentation. Means is just how you do something. Manner is usually the attitude by which you do it. Instrumentation is what you do it with, like an instrument, you know? And then agency is who you're doing it for. So agency is person, okay? Persons act as agents. Otherwise, he would just be an instrument. Okay, so that's something maybe we can get clarification on in this debate. Now, as far as about the statement about sending, I think our view accounts for all of that. Like I said, I just have these here because it's part of my research to deal with this debate, and I have these information. But here's his argument: the title God never refers to more than one person at a time. Yeah, but the thing is, you assume that there's only one person, the Father, and that one's God. But theos, without the article, can
30
refer
seconds.
sharing the essence of God. And then I'm basically going to stop right there. But thank y'all very much for your time. God bless.
Okay, Charles, thank you very much for that roughly 17-minute opening statement. We're now going to hand it to Andrew Griffin. Andrew, whenever you're ready, you also have a roughly 17-minute opening statement. If you needed to screen share, feel free to get your presentation going, and I can put it up on the screen for everybody to see.
All right, can you guys see it?
Yes, Andrew, it looks good. And so whenever you're ready, the floor is yours. I could start your timer.
All right, sweet, thanks. All right, so logos, person or personification. I am a Unitarian Christian, and I take the view that the logos is a personification. Personification, by very definition, means something is not a person. It's actually personified. It's something that is giving personal attributes for rhetorical purposes. I want to first start by defining the word logos as we see in the BDAG lexicon. We're given three primary definitions. The first is a communication whereby the mind finds expression. The second is a computation or reckoning. And the third is the independent personified expression of God, the logos. And so within the BDAG lexicon, none of these three definitions point us to say that the logos is a person. And in fact, it explicitly tells us that the logos is a personification. And another interesting thing to note here is that we're seeing the logos as an independent personified expression of God. So it's something that is seen independent of God. Nevertheless, it is the personified expression of God. Also relevant to this debate is how we define wisdom. I believe that logos and wisdom are synonymous, and we'll see that in these two definitions. I like this definition from Edward Talmage Root. he says that wisdom is, quote, the world plan, the system of truths, laws, and ideals according to which the universe has been created. The world plan existed from the beginning in the mind of God and constituted the wisdom according to which he directed his action in creation. This is the sense of wisdom in Proverbs 8:22 through 36 and 3:19 through 20. And so the wisdom is more than just a plan. It says that it is the world plan, but it's also the system of truths, laws, and ideals through which God created the cosmos. A foundational premise that I will put forth is that God never equals Trinity. Again, as we've stated already, Murray Harris says that it would be inappropriate for Elohim or Yahweh ever to refer to the Trinity in the Old Testament, when in the New Testament, theos regularly refers to the Father alone and apparently never to the Trinity. And this has a significant impact on the way that we read the Bible, especially the Old Testament, because when we get to verses such as Genesis 1:1, and we read, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, we could never read that, or we should never read that in the beginning, the Trinity created the heaven and the earth. It's just one person. And likewise, Psalm 33:6, by the word of Yahweh the heavens were made, and all the stars by the breath of his mouth. And so if Yahweh is not a Trinity, again, we have one person, and we see this repeated all throughout the Bible. We see in Isaiah 44:24, thus says Yahweh, your Redeemer, who formed you from the womb. I am Yahweh, who made all things, who alone stretched out the heavens, who spread out the earth by myself. So again, this is just one person speaking. And we have numerous examples, again, about how Yahweh founded the earth, the singular person, not a trinity. We shouldn't read it as a trinity. And if Charles wants to debate that, that's fine. But we see this one person who created the earth, the heavens and the earth by his power, by his wisdom, by his understanding. And he says that he was alone when he did it, and he did it by himself. And we've already seen also that wisdom and the personified word of God are not persons, according to how I see them defined. So one thing that I think we have that we want to do when we're trying to understand the cultural context in which the fourth gospel was written, so to see how the original audience would have understood the book, is to look at the different thought schools around the time that the fourth gospel was written. We see a lot of these in this book called The Conceptual Worlds of the Fourth Gospel. Intertextuality and early reception. They include the Septuagint, Jewish wisdom and angelology, Philo, Dead Sea Scrolls, rabbinic literature, Targums, Greco-Roman cults and philosophies like Plato, Hermetic literature, Samaritan, Mandean, etc., etc. But I am going to focus on three which I believe give us the closest contextual proximity to what we read in the Gospel of John, and that is Jewish wisdom, Philo, and the Targums. We see in Jewish wisdom, personified wisdom giving her autobiography, and we'll see a lot of correlations between what we read in the fourth gospel as well. We see first, Yahweh created me, wisdom, before his works of old. From everlasting I was established before the earth began. I was there when he established the heavens. I was his daily delight. Whoever finds me finds life and obtains the favor of Yahweh. And again, we see in the prologue where in the Logos was life, and we see that same thing here with personified wisdom in the book of Sirach. All wisdom is from the Lord, and with him it remains forever. Wisdom was created before all other things, and prudent understanding from eternity. Wisdom of Solomon, with you is wisdom. She knows your works and was present when you made the world. She understands what is pleasing in your sight and what is right according to your commandments. Send her forth from the holy heavens, and from the throne of your glory send her, that she may labor by my side, and that I may learn what is pleasing to you. Another instance is the Targum. A lot of people like to go back and loosely reference the Memra and try to extract out of there some pre-Trinity idea there, but I just want to introduce this quote and then demonstrate why it's true. from Bruce Chilton in the introduction to Targums. He says, there's no warrant for saying that there's such a thing as a concept of God's memra. Certainly not as a personal being or hypostasis, nor even that there is a systematic idea that is consistent among the Targums. What links the Targums in their distinct usages of memra is not a theological thought, but a theological manner of speaking of God in terms of divine commanding. And so we see some examples from the Targums and the memra of each individual person has their own memra. It's not something that exists as a second person outside of them. We see, for instance, Targum 2 Chronicles 16:3, Asa says to Ben-Hadad, there is a covenant between my memra and your memra. The short way to say this is that there's a covenant between me and you, but this is what scholars often point out as the circumlocution. I hope I didn't butcher that word. But there's essentially a covenant between my memra and your memra. That's just a way of saying between me and you. Between the things that I say and the things you say, they are in agreement. And again, in Targum Onkelos, we see Moses listened to the memra of his father-in-law and did all he said. And we see if men will fight and they will strike a pregnant woman, etc., they'll be punished with this penalty. The husband demands compensation. He shall pay it according to the memra of the judges. So again, the memra, and I just point that out to show that there's no sort of systematic idea of the memra here, where every time we see memra, we should think of some separate person. Now, it's just speaking about a person's divine command and something that is seen as separate from God, as we see with the Logos, the independent personified expression of God. So now getting into the text, I think it's important that we look at Genesis, because I think we agree that Genesis at John 1:1, in the beginning, there is a reference back to the Genesis creation account. The first interpretive dilemma that we're going to see is Genesis 1:2. We read, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the Hebrew Bible, it says the earth was a desolate wasteland, I think is the best way to interpret that. But when we get to the Septuagint, the Greek rendering, it says something a little bit different that I think has far-reaching implications. It says, but the earth was invisible and unconstructed. And so those two are different. Desolate wasteland would be something, of course, that we could see, that is matter, that exists. But yet in the Septuagint, it gives the Greek word aoratos, which is also used by Plato to denote the unseen pre-existing world of ideas. Philo of Alexandria, a Hellenistic Jewish philosopher, says this concerning the Logos, and the same idea concerning this invisible world, this invisible cosmos, which was created before the visible cosmos. He says a trained architect first sketches in his own mind all of the parts of the city that are to be wrought out, and he keeps his eye upon the pattern. God, having to determine a mighty state, first conceived its form in his mind, according to which form he made a world perceptible only to the intellect. And it completed the one visible to the external senses, using the first one as a model. So the idea is that there was a creation of this noetic, intelligent, intellectual cosmos that's perceived only by your intellect, a sort of plan, this invisible plan for the cosmos before making the one perceptible to the senses. And he says that world which is perceptible only to the intellect must itself be the archetypal model, the idea of ideas, the logos of God. So we see this idea also in Phaedo from Plato. It says if one could reach the summit or put on wings and fly aloft, he puts his head, he would see the world above, just as the fishes see our world when they put their heads out of the sea. And if his nature were able to bear the sight, he would recognize that this is the true heaven and the true light and the true earth. So not only do we see this theme of aletheia, this true ultimate reality in the Gospel of John, but here we also see this reference to the true light, the same exact expression we find in the prologue of John. And so a little background on this true light. We see in Genesis 1 again, this interpretive dilemma that on day 1 of creation, God says, let there be light. But on day 4 of creation, that is when God creates the sun. And then it says, and God separated the light from the darkness. So the interpretive dilemma there is, how was there light before the creation of the sun. That again is answered in Philo in this Platonic thought, but also we see this in the wisdom literature. In Wisdom 7, it says, "For she, wisdom, is a reflection of eternal light, a spotless mirror of the working of God, an image of his goodness. She is more beautiful than the sun and excels every constellation of the stars. Compared with the light, that is the natural light, she is found to be superior, for it is succeeded by the night, but against wisdom evil does not prevail." So we see this idea of this intellectual light that's wisdom, essentially, that is in contrast with the sensible light, which would be the sun or the stars. And then we see this contrast, just like we see in John, where the darkness did not overtake it. We see that, but against wisdom, evil does not prevail. So you have a light, darkness. Evil would obviously be a darkness, and you see the contrast. And we see this explicitly also in Philo, where he says, "After the shining forth of that light, perceptible only to the intellect, which existed before the sun, then its adversary darkness yielded, as God put a wall between them and separated them, well knowing their opposite characters and the enmity existing between their natures." So we see this contrast between what is good and what is evil, and God, and between light and between darkness. And we see that perceptible light, that true light, which was a model for the sun. So just as the sun nourishes the physical world and our physical bodies and earth, so the intellectual light, the true light, nourishes our intellectual life and our spiritual life. We read about the light. It says the light shines in the darkness did not comprehend it. John came as a witness that he might testify concerning the light. He was not the light, but he came that he might witness concerning the light. The true light, which enlightens every man, was coming into the world. And so this is something that speaks about intelligence and intellectual development. And when somebody's enlightened, that means obviously they're enlightened by knowledge and wisdom, and that corresponds with what the Logos is, what wisdom is. And of course, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. We're going to have to explain especially how it is that the Logos was God. So we've seen that the Logos existed prior to creation, so it's there in the beginning. But we see, according to the BDAG, it's a communication by where the mind finds expression, a computation or a reckoning, or the independent personified expression of God. And so we have this computation that God's developing prior to creating all the cosmos that corresponds with everything we read about the Logos and wisdom. We see personified wisdom is with God. And we gave verses where wisdom is said to be with God. She was there before the beginning. So in the beginning, she was already there. And this speaks about the eternal, immutable truths of laws and ideals through which God created the cosmos. And also in Philo, we see explicitly here, but the divine Logos itself an image of God, the most ancient of all objects of the intellect in the whole world, and that which is placed is in the closest proximity to the only truly existing God, without distance being interposed between them. So when we see that the Logos was pros God, it's this Greek word that essentially holds the weight of it's with God, but also towards God. And just wrapping up this last slide, so that leaves the question, though, still. We have that answered for with wisdom, but how do we answer that the Logos was God? So the interpretive issue that we have here is, see on the screen, is that the Logos was with ton theon. That would mean the Logos was with the God. But then it's a question of how do we define that the Logos was theos? There's essentially three different definitions that we could, or ways we can interpret this. If we see it as definite, we would say, well, the Logos was with the God and the Logos was the God, but that opens up more to modalism. If we see it indefinitely, like the Logos was a God, like Arians see it, but that I disagree that that's what it's saying. I do agree, however, that it's more qualitative, like Daniel Wallace would say. And so we have to really ask ourselves, okay, well, it's qualitatively God. Well, now we understand the grammar, but what exactly does it mean within this context? And I just want to point out real quick, this exact parallel of thought from Philo that we see explaining this exact interpretive dilemma we see here. He says there's one true God only. Something else we read in the Bible, John 17:3, there's only one true God. But those who are called gods by an abuse of language are numerous. It is the true God that is meant by the use of the article, the expression being I am the God, but when the word theos is used catachrestically, it is put without the article, and what he calls God here is his most ancient logos. And so fully expressive of God, the logos and wisdom are both the image of God. They express the characteristics of his goodness. And I'm done.
Okay, Andrew, thank you so much for that 17-minute opening statement. So, gentlemen, great job on your opening statements. I appreciate the visuals, very helpful, always with an opening statement, and just the work and time you both put into those. So now it's time to engage each other's arguments as we move into our uninterrupted rebuttal portion of this debate. To the audience, I am all caught up on questions. I appreciate the engagement in the chat on this topic. So please, again, if you do have a question for our guest tonight, we're having a roughly 25 to 30 minute Q&A after the closing statement. So make sure to send those questions in. Okay, Charles, we're going to hand it back to you as I restart my timer. You have 10 minutes for a rebuttal. And what I'll do is give you a 30-second to a 1-minute warning to let you know to start wrapping things up. Okay, so the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So one thing I appreciate when debating Andrew is that he will give your sources. That's helpful in debate preparation and also in this debate. Some of the people I debated, they just gave antidotes, and we don't have time for that. All right. So he started quoting the Badag. The thing to understand about the Badag is the Badag is early Christian literature. All right. So it goes back from Homer all the way up to early Christian literature. So, of course, you can find a definition or use. The question is, does it list, and I don't know if it does it list any of these biblical passages under question underneath the categories that he mentions? So you have to be very careful about how to use a lexicon. Far as about the issue about the wisdom and all of that stuff, well, this is not a Proverbs 8 debate. You know, we can do that in the future and everything. But remember, I granted that there's personification in John 1. I'm granting it for the sake of the argument. But what he has to show is why there's not personhood in John 1. I think that's very important. As for his statements quoting Murray Harris, which I anticipated in my opening thanks to studying his debates, Harris's point is that you can't say they were talking about the Trinity in the Old Testament because it wasn't progressively revealed at that time. He's not saying that the Trinity doesn't exist. He's just saying you got to evaluate things in light of progressive revelation. He's not making a grammatical argument. He's making a statement about progressive revelation. Now, as for the other passages you mentioned about Yahweh, well, my assumption is Yahweh refers to every member of the Trinity. And so whenever he says alone, okay, well, alone in contrast to the other gods, or alone in contrast to the other kings or the enemies or whatever it may be. There's only one God, the Echad, right? So that's not a problem. As for your comments about intertextuality, I like the subject of intertextuality. The thing is in that book, you have a whole smorgasbord of ideas that were in existence right there, including Gnostic teachings and other things like that. If we limit it to the inspired books and then treat everything else as, okay, was it written after the 1st century? That limits his list. And was it written during the silent years in the Old Testament? If so, we can't put it on the same level as other scriptures. And so that factors in things. And all it's doing is describing what the people thought and what they believed at that time, not saying how it should be. Okay? And then he mentioned the statement, well, far as close to proximity. And I'm glad he mentioned that, because when you're doing a word study, you would start with classical Greek, you would go into Attic Greek, you would go into Septuagintal Greek, you would go into, getting closer to Koine Greek. Then you would look in versions, and all of that stuff. So I appreciate that approach. Like I said, a lot of that stuff is extra biblical. Now, whenever I took prolegomena with Dr. Stollard, I was writing and how to do theology, how to teach theology in a church or whatever. And I talked about the Logos in that. And he had told me at that time, be very careful about how you try to link the Logos with the Memra and all of that stuff. So I think it's interesting because it helped prepare me for this debate, because I don't argue the typical way that other people argue. And far as about the quotation for the Septuagint, it's interesting, but I don't think it solves anything, and I don't think it helps. Just because it's making allusion or similar language doesn't necessarily mean it's the same thing. Similarity is not the sameness. All right. Far as about quoting Philo, where he's talking about the idea of ideas, which goes back to Plato. Well, Plato, and I'm a little rusty on this, but Plato believed in the forms, right? The real and the unreal, or so the ideas are related to that. Aristotle did essence, substance, accidents. These people were trying to use a term that would account to essence. So idea of ideas would be essence of meaning, sharing of the same essence. What does the of mean in that relationship? You still have to qualify how the genitive is being used there. And there's different ones. There's source, origin, production. It can be qualitative, having the attributes. We still got to qualify that. As for the quote about the true light, well, like I said, you got to do an order of word studies. And what you notice is he started dropping back here. He started going back to older literature than at the Bible time. And why would you look for true light in any other place except the glory of God? The bookends of the Bible, Revelation, talks about the Lamb. There's not going to be need for the sun, because the Lord and the Lamb will be its light. Furthermore, the glory could be in Genesis 1:1. Before the physical light was ever created, God is able to manifest his glory and light and all of that stuff. Also, the light of the world language in there, that could be explained by the menorah, that Jesus is the light of the world, the gigantic menorah that was in front of the temple, related to the whole glory motif in Ezekiel and the departing of the glory and the return of the glory and all of those issues. Now, the thing is when you're looking at this literature, when he's looking at Philo, he's seeing Philo's answers, but that doesn't mean Philo's necessarily right. He assumes that he's right. Then when he talks about these issues about the true light in contrast to the darkness overcome it, well, here's my question. Is evil personification too? Or do you literally believe that there is a Satan, a physical being? If so, then are you saying that there's a personification opposed to an actual person, or is Satan a personification to you as well? So remember, we got to remember this. Philo, yes, he was a Jew, but he was a compromised Jew in the sense that he was Hellenistic, and John is a Jewish Jew that was probably brought up in the Jewish temple. Some people make the argument that's why he had access for certain perspectives in the Gospel of John to talk about certain things whenever the other disciples betrayed. As I said, similarity is not sameness. And the other thing is that I know that Andrew holds to a polemic view of the Gospel of John. And his polemic view basically says is that it's against emperor worship. Well, I don't think it's Unitarianism refutes emperor worship. I think what he was doing was sort of like what they did with the Sol Invictus, the Day of the Unconquered Sun. They basically said the Son of Righteousness of Malachi triumphed over that. So somebody claims to be the rap god. So what do? You actually defeat them, take that title, rub it in their face. We see that with the cloud rider motif of Baal used in the Old Testament. So that's a polemic. So I don't think that this argument, all this language and stuff, God can use the Jewishness of the culture and still refute the pagan of the Greek and the Romans at the same time. God gets the most mileage out of all his arguments. So in addition to the question of why aren't you Muslim and why aren't you polytheist, my next question is why aren't you Gnostic? Because you started quoting all those other Gnostic things, and we could talk about aeons or avatars and demiurges and all of that stuff. And and then the next question is, why aren't you a disciple of Manly P. Hall, secret teachings of all ages, or Isis Unveiled, blasphemy? This esoteric knowledge is nothing new. It's nothing special, whether you're Rosicrucian or all these other, I know you don't like the word cults, but this language is used by them. So it's not really an issue. Now, the thing is I wonder, Andrew, do you have formal training in the languages? And it's okay if you don't. I was informally trained from 2006 up to 2016 without ever going to seminary. But I've had my formal requirements for THM for Greek. When it used the word catachristically, I started looking up and I'm like, does he mean cataphorically? Is that another word for that? I would have to see what catachristis is. I don't know if it's a figure of speech or whatever, but I want to explore that because your argument about the word a god or whatever, that's in a first year Greek book, okay? And the thing is that you say qualitative, whatever that means. Well, the qualitative is what it's saying is that we know what is the subject because it has the article. There's a pecking order whenever you're establishing Greek. Does it have a proper noun? Is it a pronoun? Or does it have the definite article? If you have those, then you know what is the article. And therefore, when you have two nominatives in the case, the logos being one nominative and theos being the other nominative, you know which one is the subject, nominative subject, versus which one's a predicate nominative. So without the article being thrown forward at the sentence for a discourse function to emphasize the quality and essence of something, it makes sense to go with that. And, I'm going to go ahead and go into some Greek more. I know other people done it in their debates, but I'll just bore people with Greek until they shut up. So we have NRK ein halagos, right? The word ein is an imperfect form. Typically what's happening is people say imperfect means continuous action and past, and therefore it's stative. And
30
so
seconds.
it's referring to the fact that the logos is eternal. Well, this is the thing. Andrew has said he doesn't deny the logos is eternal. The issue is he doesn't believe it's a person. Well, why don't you believe it's a person? Let's get personal. God bless.
Okay, thank you very much, Charles, for that fast-paced 10-minute rebuttal. We're now going to hand it back to Andrew. Andrew, whenever you're ready, you also have a 10-minute rebuttal, and the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you. So that's a lot to cover. I appreciate the engagement. That is one thing I appreciate from Charles is his willingness to teach people, and with that he does in the layman seminary. I'm not trained in languages, but I am familiar with grammatical arguments, and I don't think anything I said is against the grammar. And so if he wants to make an argument from grammar, that's fine. Anthony Rogers says grammar and syntax, that's the name of the game. Well, that's not really the name of the game. That's only one step in the hermeneutical process. As Peter Phillip notes in his book, A Sequential Reading of the Fourth Gospel, that, okay, you've figured out the grammar, so what? I mean, there's still a lot that we need to say, and ultimately meaning is determined by context. And so, yes, you will see me refer to other sources and all the different conceptual worlds because that is a critical step in the hermeneutical process, is understanding cultural context and what this writing would have meant to its original audience. Let's see. So I keep seeing an assumption, and I see this a lot from Trinitarians respectfully, is that there is always this assumption that logos equals Jesus. There's an assumption, and so there's an assertion that I think is a baseless assertion on Charles's part, that he keeps saying, well, the logos, it's obviously Jesus, it's obviously a person, but never established that fact. And perhaps he will, but as of right now, he has not established that fact, to where I give a definition from the lexicon, from history, from culture, so I'm really interested to see, well, what does he think the logos means, and why was that used when that word doesn't refer to a person? The word itself does not mean a person. It refers to a computation, or this calculation, this planning that God has done. Again, equatable with wisdom, the system of truths, laws, and ideals through which God has created the cosmos. And so another thing he said in his opening, that the logos is just a plan, in my view, and I did have that view very early on, but a lot of it depends on, well, how do we define plan? There's a plan as in something that he foreordains that comes to fruition later, perhaps, but I see it more as a blueprint, and then the container of ideas, and then also, and so perhaps something that's foreordained is contained within the blueprint of God's of God creating, so he doesn't seem to accept the fact that or agree with Mary Harris when Mary Harris says that Yahweh or the title God never referred to the Trinity. Now, and he made the assertion that I say that, well, God never refers to anyone other than the Father, and that's not correct. I do believe that is a title that is applied to human beings, human judges. We know that explicitly from Jesus himself in the Gospel of John. And we see other beings, such as angels, called gods, and that doesn't make me a polytheist. I actually have a debate on this about does the Bible teach Unitarian monotheism or Trinitarian monotheism, which I granted to be a thing, Trinitarian monotheism. But I went through, I believe it was Benjamin Sommer's book, and how he defines monotheism. And there's essentially, you could say, well, there's just one God, and he's the only thing that exists, and there's no other supernatural beings. That you could say that that's a form of monotheism, but then we would have to deny the Bible, because there are supernatural beings called gods who are alongside God, and we see human beings called God. And this is one of the points that Philo makes when he's talking about the logos was theos, how it's catachrestic, it's an abusive language. There's only one who is the true God, aletheia, the ultimate underlying reality, but many who are called gods. This is a point that is expressed again in the Gospel of John in several places. For instance, if he called you gods, to whom the word of God came, I think. And then we see Jesus telling his Father that, hey, you are the only true God. So while other things can be called God and appear to be representatives of God and things like this, you are the only true God. And this is the point made all the way back in the beginning of the prologue. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with the God. And then we see the absence of the anarthrists use the absence of the article for theos, and it is typically by scholars such as Daniel Wallace, Trinitarian scholar Daniel Wallace. He says it's qualitatively God. Well, what is that? That just begs the question. Well, what does that mean? He asserts it refers to ontological essence and all these things, but doesn't demonstrate why. So I think it's a baseless assertion, and there's a lot more to be found concerning that. And maybe we can get into that. So he talks about the only begotten God. I do accept that as that's the earliest manuscripts say the only begotten God in John 1:18. But then the question is, well, is Jesus the only begotten God? No, Jesus. I mean, is the Father the only begotten God? No, he's not. And then, well, what does it mean to be begotten? That means that you come into existence. And so, it's a little bit much for this debate. If we might get into that. And then we talk about, well, he says, well, the Logos explains God. Okay, well, so when it says that no one has ever seen God, who is God there? And it doesn't say no one has ever seen the Father. It's an entire complete God there. No one has ever seen God, period. The invisible God we read about all throughout the New Testament, it's one singular person. He can't be seen. No one's ever seen him. And so if someone can't be seen, in the context of John, it refers to understanding him. And this is why it says that the Logos, the monogenes theos, this quote-unquote second God, has explained him. He needs explanation because he's invisible. He needs someone that can explain him. And so if you have this invisible God and then you have someone who's supposedly been seen, well, then whoever's been seen is not the invisible God. The better explanation is that you have an invisible transcendent God who is in need of who manifests himself, maybe not in need, but he manifests himself in different ways because he dwells in unapproachable light. And so God might manifest himself through his word or through, Hebrews says that God has spoken in various times in manifold ways. In all sort of different ways God has communicated, but in this time has spoken in a son. Let's see, and it's he says something about a true personification. Well, I'm a little bit. It's a little bit unclear how he's defining personification, because my understanding, and I think most people would agree, that a personification means something is not a person. It's giving a non-personal thing personal characteristics for rhetorical reasons. let's see here. He talks about the BDAG in early Christian literature. Of course, we want to understand what these words and what this terminology and what these things meant to the earliest readers. I'm not concerned with how so much with how later people interpret it. I want to know what it meant to John, what it meant to his original audience within the cultural context that he wrote it. Perhaps he was writing for polemic reasons, but then we still need to understand the other ideas to understand what he was polemically writing against, right? So I think he talks about forms and ideas as equal to essence. I think we're getting way off into just philosophical ideas, and I don't think that's true. If you have an idea, an idea is an idea. So the idea that no pun intended, but the idea that an idea is an essence is incorrect. You talk about forms, they're just ideas. And again, we go back and we see the parallel, the direct parallel between wisdom is the system of truths, laws, and ideals. These are immutable truths. The logos is the idea of ideas. It is the embodiment of all of that is good. Everything that is good comes from the logos. And again, the logos is fully expressive of God, just like wisdom. It's an exact representation, but the question is, what is it representing? It's representing the good characteristics of God, and all that is good is found in the expression of wisdom, and that's the only way the transcendent God can be understood. When we look at creation, we can't see God, but we know that he exists because of the order in creation, because of the moral order in creation, and this is what the Logos
20
is.
seconds.
And this is what the Logos is, and this is found in the person and incarnate and manifest in the person of Jesus. Thanks.
Okay, Andrew, thank you very much for that 10-minute rebuttal. Gentlemen, excellent job so far. That concludes the opening statements and also the 10-minute rebuttals for tonight's debate. And so we're now moving into a 50-minute discussion broken up into two 25-minute periods of cross-exam. And so what we'll do, since Andrew just ended with his 10-minute rebuttal, Charles, we're going to let you lead the way for the first 25 minutes. And so again, gentlemen, the floor is yours. Charles, on your first question, go ahead and just make sure to unmute.
Do you believe that John 1:1 and 1:18 is an inclusio for the prologue?
Yes.
Okay. Do you believe that John 1:18 is unlocking or explaining 1:1?
I think, yeah. I mean, they're complementary for sure. I mean, yeah, for
Okay.
sure. Yeah.
So if you go with the begotten God, or then you agree that God is person in that passage, right?
No, because
So
again,
begotten God means not person?
that's correct. Yes.
Okay. So what if it's begotten son? Would it be person then?
Not necessarily, because the context determines what the meaning is.
I understand that. So are you saying there's such thing as a God that's not a person?
I'm saying it's a figure of speech to call something a God who's not a person. For Philo, who I think is the closest contextual parallel to what we see in the Gospel of John, he says explicitly, he answers this very dynamic that we see in John 1 and says that the Logos is called theos from an abuse of language. So I would ask more hermeneutically, what does that mean? But if you want to keep going with
well, I mean, I am interested in these things, but let me. So, tell me where I'm getting this wrong. If 1:1 is interpreted by 1:18, and God is being described as being in the bosom of the Father, okay. If that's all personal language, then wouldn't that make the word personal in 1:1?
No, because the context determines what we're talking about, and the context is the logos, and the
But how do
logos
you
is not a
determine the
person.
context?
Oh, well, I follow something like the hermeneutical spiral. One way is cultural context.
Right, I understand.
So
I
yeah,
understand that.
yeah.
But so, what makes you jump to Philo? What? Why do you think that person is not a possibility in John 1? Why
It's
have
not
you
that,
ruled that
yeah.
out?
It's not that it's not a possibility.
Mhm.
It's that ultimately meaning is determined by context, and so when
So,
we're
if Philo did not exist, would that affect your interpretation?
um perhaps, perhaps,
How
but
do
it
you know? How do you know
yeah.
that John is using the logos in the exact same way that Philo is?
I don't. Well, I mean, in some ways, it's exactly the same. In some ways, he goes a step beyond because, uh, to Philo, Moses was the supreme revealer of God, right? And but to Christians now, Jesus is the supreme revealer of God, and that's stated explicitly, I think, in 117 that the law came through Moses. That is a particular type of revelation, and now the Logos, which is actually the eternal, immutable truth, has been expressed. But the idea is that the law of Moses was a temporal revelation, and
When you first read Philo, did you read it all at once? I mean, when you were first exposed to it, did you just sit down and read all of Philo, and
no.
did you understand it?
No, he's a very voluminous writer. It's very complex. At times, his theories seem to contradict each other, but I don't think that he's writing so that we hermeneutically can understand something rather than being a systematic theologian.
You mentioned scholars that you feel like understand Philo correctly, right? You so there is debate about how to understand Philo. Would you agree with that, or would you say that everybody understands Philo the same way?
No, no. There's some people like you'll have like your what's Daniel Boyarin, or
Mhm.
somebody like Margaret Barker, maybe Alan Siegel. Those are among people who would talk about two powers. But again, their argument is that the logos or wisdom is actually a person. So that's really the root of the argument there.
Okay. So let's talk about the begotten thing, because my understanding initially was that you were saying the logos was a plan, and then when God created Jesus, that plan was implemented. Is that how
No, no,
all right,
no.
so how did the plan become flesh?
It's not that it's a plan. Again, I stated in my
Yeah, you did, but you did.
yeah,
I don't think you clarified it enough.
yeah.
Explain how you understand the word became flesh.
Well, first, when we go to the Word of God, we know that it's a polyvalent Word of God. So there is this Word of God where He created the cosmos, but there's also this Word of God where He intervenes in the affairs of creation itself, and so it's a polyvalent word. But the context we're talking about here is creation, but it's essentially the same word, right? I mean, God spoke. There's a word, but also God can send forth his word to accomplish things and it returns to him, right? We read in Isaiah.
So, getting down to the specifics, how does the word become flesh in that passage?
Oh, well, that's interesting because it's often assumed by people when exactly the word became flesh. Right? Because there's nothing within the context of John anywhere. Well, I would argue that there is in John 3, but there's no idea within the prologue, especially of a specific time when the Word became flesh. So
All
first
right,
thing we
what do you
understand,
currently
yeah,
believe about that? Let's go with that.
I think that there's a parallel. And this is cultural thought that goes with Philo as well, but into the idea of ideal kingship that was also predates the Bible by a couple hundred years, and the king was thought to embody the truth of God, And so there's this whole idea within Judaism of ascending to gain knowledge, like we read, I think, Baruch 3:29, who has ascended up to bring to take wisdom and bring her down. So it's not a specific point. Like some people argue, oh, the baptism, and that's when the Word became flesh. It's just a summary of some time over the course of the life of Jesus. It's expressing that this Word has become manifest.
So,
in a person.
are you saying it's not referring to the virgin birth or anything?
I don't believe it's referring to the virgin birth. No, I don't think there's anything that you can.
So, are you saying that he became flesh later on in his life, like an adoptionist concept?
Adoption is like, yeah, but just the Word did become flesh at some point in his life. Yeah.
And I really do not know your beliefs about Jesus, okay? Do you believe that Jesus died on the cross?
Yes.
Did the Word die on the cross?
No. The Word
was the Word
the Word can't die.
Okay, was the Word removed? I mean, if something happened in his life where he became the Word personified, but yet the Word didn't die on the cross in his person, then what happened to the Word?
Well, the Word has always existed and always will exist. It's a figure. It's more of a figure of speech rather than taking it to be some sort of literal thing where it creates more problems for the Trinitarian position.
So personification has always existed. Is that what you're saying?
No, the Logos has always existed, and it's described by the rhetorical device of personification.
Okay, so if you say that the Logos is a personification and it's always existed, then wouldn't that mean that the concept of personification has always existed?
No, because
we might not have known it by that term, but it existed within God.
No, the Logos has always existed. Personification is something we use as humans to describe something.
I understand that, but if you're going to say, okay, personification is a thing, right, that we describe as having personal characteristics. If you say that the Logos is eternal and that it's a personification, then it's a thing that takes on what characteristics? What personal characteristics existed? Do you believe in a personal God is what I'm asking.
Personal characteristics. I don't. I think that you're starting with this assumption, and it came out in your opening of that. The way you described it, I've never heard before, so you have to.
Right, this is my own argument, so
yeah. So
I wanted to give you something new.
so let me just say that the Logos existed. There's not a personification. That I don't think the personification necessarily has real existence. The Logos has real existence, and
okay.
Personification is just a rhetorical device that we use as humans to describe something that is not a person, and we give it personal attributes.
So, what was the function of the Logos before our concept of personification?
It is the like wisdom, just the truths, laws, and ideals through which God created the cosmos. They're eternal, immutable truths.
So is the Logos an attribute of God?
No, I don't. But the Logos is an image of God's reasoning.
Do you differentiate the essence of God versus his attributes? I know you don't like the word essence, but
no, I'm fine with the word essence just as long as we define it. I understand it. Essence essentially is understood by its attributes, and right, yeah. If you understand it different, that's fine.
Okay, so if God, let me ask you this question again: is God a personal being?
Yes, the Father is a personal being. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so person existed before personification.
What do you mean person?
The person of God existed as a person before personification existed. You said personification is something we made up. Now you said the Logos has always existed, but you also said the Logos is the attribute of God. Yet you don't want to say that it's God itself. So person has to exist before that. So the person made a plan, or if you don't want to limit it to plan, then you have to use other terms to explain it. And I need to understand what you're exactly meaning by that, because that's where I'm having a difficulty to wrap my head around. But the other thing I wanted to ask you is, what about the unique translation of begotten? Will you accept that translation? As instead
Yes.
of monogenes as begotten is rather unique.
I think uniquely begotten would be a good way to, you know,
So
to translate that.
why does that rule out personhood then? Because whether it's unique God or unique Son, it still allows for person.
Because it's just a figure of speech. So a lot of people go back to Philo and try to understand his idea of so the logos is called the firstborn son of God. But let's apply that. Let's apply that principle to his works universally. He also says that wisdom is the sister of God. He also says that wisdom is the mother of all things. And so while he says that the Logos is the firstborn son of God, he also calls creation the youngest born son of God. And so it's just things that come from God, and it's a figure of speech.
So they come from God. Did Philo hold to monism?
Like monism.
No, monad. The idea that God existed as one, and then something emanated from him, and then created something else. And you might think of it like the also. It showed up in Hinduism as well. Monadism. That's what Blaskovy argues for in Isis Unveiled. The creator destroyer a concept. The reason I asked that is because when you're talking about creation, okay, you recognize there's a distinction between the creator and the creation, right?
Yes.
All right. Now, agency. How can a person be how can the Logos be an agent if he's not a person?
I mean, I wish I was there when it happened. I think these are all just ways that we explain something. They're all just it's all speculative in nature of, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's not very convincing. I mean, it almost sounds like you're retreating into mystery here.
Well, no, we can go into details about, and flesh that out a little more. But Philo says something like the Logos was not unbegotten like the Father, but not begotten like creation. It existed somewhere in between the two extremes.
Do you agree? Do you agree that in Timothy and Titus, I think it is Timothy, wherever Paul talks about don't pay attention to foolish genealogies and speculations, that part of what he was addressing were some of the abuses that came about applying Philo? Do you agree with that? Are you familiar with that claim?
I've never heard anyone say that.
Okay.
That apply that directly to Philo himself. No.
Yeah, because it was. But anyway, and Colossians as well. There's been arguments about that. All right, so what is your Greek authority? You said as far as about qualitative, you mentioned about Wallace. You said, well, what does that mean? And then you said we could talk about other claims. Well, what is your Greek authority that you're quoting other than Harris? And I'm not against Harris. I think Harris does a good job. He's a good scholar. I don't think he's saying exactly what you're saying.
He's not. I mean, yeah,
okay.
like you pointed out, I believe they make a baseless assertion and say, well, it's qualitatively, therefore it's the same essence. And that's a baseless assertion that doesn't flesh out when we see that the Logos or even Jesus does not have all of the qualities necessary to be identical in essence with God the Father.
What does catachristically mean?
It's just it's a rhetorical device. It's an intentional abuse of language for rhetorical purposes.
Okay, because I was wondering, does he mean cataphoric? Because cataphoric is whenever you have you have two types of articles. You have anaphoric and cataphoric. One points forward, the other one points back. So that's why I was confused. Like, okay, but so what he's saying is it breaks the rules. Now I've heard you mention in other debates about Philo and about how he understood the article. And you brought up, well, I think it's with Anthony Rogers. I can't remember who. But you basically said, well, it makes sense for us to follow a grammarian of the first century to understand John 1 rather than the grammarians of today. But here's my question. Philo was speaking about the use of the article. Philo was not speaking of a syntactical construction. He was not speaking of the word in its particular context, in its clause or whatever. Is that correct?
Sure.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
it's not. It's not sorry. It's not some sort of some grammatical principle that you can universally apply to anywhere in the Bible. He's just trying to
Well,
make. He's trying to make a point so that we understand something.
right. And grammarians, they will describe what they see at that time. Now, the thing is, he focused on articles, but others have focused on the syntactical construction. And there's like, okay, this is a predicate preverbal nominative, and this is how it functions in this particular way. And therefore, this rules out certain possibilities. So it's not just an issue of the article, it's an issue of the syntactical construction, you know. So I wanted to bring that up because I think that's part of the issue as well. You know, I think that my issue is I'm arguing that there is personification, but the person is in there because God is a person and the Son is a person, and 118 is interpreting 1:1. And your objection to that is that just go to Philo, right? That's your
No.
objection?
No, not at all. I follow the entire hermeneutical spiral. So there's nowhere within the the text, the chapter, the book, the New Testament, Old Testament, Intertestament, historical. There's nothing that I haven't explored or nothing that contradicts. So it's not just like, oh, Philo explains it and that's the end of the story. It just helps us get a better idea about what is going on. Because, like we see with John 1:1c, yes, they point to this, pre-verbal, whatever. But then they just make an assertion, okay, it's qualitative. That's it. Hermeneutically, that means nothing. That doesn't help you understand God or reality.
Well, it
It's just-
does. Let me tell you why it does. Let me tell you why. Because when you're talking about adjectives, adjectives are descriptive, and you have what are called attributive adjectives. They focus on characteristics. Like if I say living God, I'm talking about the God that's characterized by living. So when you're talking about the qualitative aspect of something, you're talking about the characteristics that are being emphasized. So rather than the personhood being emphasized, the quality of God is being emphasized. So what is the quality of God? Well, you don't like the word essence, but whatever God is, he shared it with the Son or with the Word.
That's the argument. But I would ask myself, well, why is John making an ontological argument here? What would be the purpose? Why would he just say something? And rather, if we say that the whole context is about understanding something, why would it be about just a dogmatic statement about essence? Okay, he says the logos is God and his essence. Okay, who cares? I mean, why would he say that? What would be the point in saying that? That's what I would ask myself.
Well, it relates to the identity of who the Son is and the claims of Christianity. So, I mean, you're making an ontological argument. You're arguing that he's just a man, right?
No, I'm not. I don't argue the logos is a man.
Okay, but you argue that the Logos became flesh in some sense.
But it's not Jesus. Again, there's that assumption there that the logos equals Jesus, and that's just incorrect.
I understand that, but what the argument is that I'm saying is Logos is used as a job, okay, a title. And the one that best fulfills that is the second person of the Trinity that took on that form in the flesh. You want to deny that personhood could even be in there, but your only reason for denying it is because of your presuppositions about the Logos.
You have presuppositions.
Of course, we both do. And then you know that in the hermeneutical spiral, the first thing you got to deal with is your pre-understanding. And the text should correct that. You don't go to the culture to correct that. You go to the text and you go outwardly.
Yeah.
And you know that whenever you're quoting my undergraduate's in sociology, so I do emphasize culture and all that stuff, but you have to be very careful. Same thing with the ancient Near-Eastern arguments and stuff. I wouldn't base my whole faith on extra biblical literature and a cultural context of these people that had variegated beliefs.
Okay, so then prove it. If
Prove
it's a person,
what?
prove it. Prove it's a person. That's
Prove
your
it's a
job. That's your
person.
responsibility. Yeah, that's your job. You're arguing that it's a person, so prove it. I mean, if you say that we all have our presuppositions, we're both following the same model of hermeneutics, and so prove it. That's what I'm doing.
Well, I guess what I would say is that an agent, it has to be a person. Like I said, whenever you break down Greek, you got means, manner, instrument, and agency. Means, how you do it; manner, the attitude you do it; instrument, what you do it with; agency, who's doing it, and representative of what. It's a who. In fact, on your slide, you said he is the representative.
And I just want to jump in and just make sure
Uh,
when you finish your statement or argument,
huh?
Charles, that it ends with a question for Andrew to engage.
Okay. Why did you call the Logos a he on your slide with debating Sean Cole?
It's for the same reason we call wisdom a she. It's just a personification, and it deals with the kind of with the grammar. But I have a whole video where I break down the prologue about the masculine and the feminine, and those deal with the masculine reason and the feminine senses. So there's that whole thing. It's pretty complex, but it's no problem to call it a he, just like we call wisdom a she. It's not a person unless you have like some sort of trans second person of the Trinity, which is kind of weird in this day and age.
How are we doing on time, Donnie? I didn't know if that was a final question thing.
No. We're doing well. I can't believe how quickly time is flying by. We just hit the 23-minute mark. So you got a solid 2 minutes, Charles, to ask some final questions.
Well, like I said, I do commend you that you give me resources to look into. I'm not an expert in this, but I guess really what I would like to know is, why do you think your Unitarian view is a polemic against the Roman Emperor concept?
Well, I think it's not that the whole book is just solely a polemic. Actually, it's a polemic against a lot of different things. We see the polemic where Jesus is greater than John the Baptist, who had a big following at that time. Jesus is a polemic against the physical descendants of Abraham and their pride in being a physical descendant. That's answered in the prologue, where you're not born of flesh and blood. There's not a matter of physical lineage. There's the polemic against the law of Moses, and Jesus is showing that if you believe Moses, you will believe me because he wrote about me. And the idea about the logos and the law of the logos and the law of Moses is that it's a polemic and showing that the logos is actually a greater revelation than the law of Moses. We also see the polemic with Jesus being compared to the emperor all throughout the book. So there is that polemic against Emperor Domitian, who was emperor at the time that the book was written. So it's not solely just against the emperor, but that is certainly in there.
Okay. What about epistemology? In other words, we got scripture, it's revealed scripture, but you're quoting other things that deal with rationalism, empiricism, mysticism, and you're using these to interpret the revelation of scripture. Do you think that's a safe foundation to be on, to do?
Well, you're either depending on your reasoning or someone else's, right? If you want to make the claim that the Holy Spirit taught you something, well, what if I made anybody can make a claim that the Holy Spirit taught him whatever, but how do we prove it? And so you use your brain, I use my brain. We can't say that we're rejecting our own thoughts and we're accepting the thoughts of another man. Well, how do we know he's correct?
Yeah. Gentlemen, great first round of cross-exam. Very professional, cordial. I appreciate the questions and the answers. Now we're moving into our second 25-minute cross-exam where Andrew is going to be bringing the heat. Charles, he's going to keep you on your toes. So I'm looking forward to this. Gentlemen, all jokes aside, 25 minutes. And Andrew, you get to lead the way. So gentlemen, floor is yours again. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll bring the heat, but I'll try. I'll try that. I appreciate the hype. Yeah, I guess let's just kind of walk through the prologue. And so how I come to my understanding is that I want to find what best explains the text. So we'll start with, in the beginning was the Logos. So it's your understanding, right, that the Logos is some sort of second person alongside God, right?
Yeah, but he's being described as his job function, if you will. His function is to reveal God.
Okay, so So a second person, though, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's referring essentially in one way or another to a second person.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so,
And
so
I
given
you
that,
and I base that off of 118
okay,
because of the inclusio.
okay, and so I gave a definition from the BDAG of logos. Is there anything you would like to add to that definition of what the word logos itself means?
No,
Uh,
the basic gloss of logos is word, matter, thing. Same thing with dabar in the Hebrew. No, it's now philosophically. I understand the principle, the rationale, those claims like that. But to my typical way of translating it, like it says in First Peter 1:23, having been born again, not a corruptible seed, but the incorruptible word of God, which lives and abides forever. Logos is being used there, and then Rhema is being used right after that. So they seem to be synonymous.
okay, so that use in Peter, do you think that's referring to Jesus?
It's kind of tricky because is he talking about the word of God, the living word, or the written word? Let's see. Haven't been born again, not of incorruptible seed. I mean, not a corruptible seed, but incorruptible seed. The word of God, which lives and abides with us forever. Living and abiding, it's very possible that could refer to the logos, the person, because he's talking about indwelling. Now the Bible also says, let this word dwell in you richly. So I could see both, and it may be an example as of the polysemious nature of the word in the passage.
So you haven't really made up your mind yet. Is that what I'm getting?
No, I'm seeing the possibilities, just like in 1 John 1:1 concerning the word of life. That's another option,
Yeah.
because it's the same literature.
But you don't seem to have made up your mind on that second Peter.
No,
You haven't really explored it yet. And so, well, I would say, well, let's assume that it's not a person. If you were to just explore the possibilities, let's look at one first. If it were not a person, what does the word of God mean there? What does the logos of God mean
if
there?
it's not a person, it's
Yeah.
just talking about the word, the Bible, that someone got saved through the Bible, probably.
Like what do you mean word?
The Bible at that time. In other words, the prophetic word, the more sure word of prophecy that's used for Peter. The
So it's
message, the gospel.
so it's a message. It's a communication.
Yes, it's a message,
Okay.
communication.
All right. And so now back to the logos. What reason do you think that John would have to call Jesus the logos there? I mean, we admit that logos doesn't equal person itself.
Mhm.
And so he has to be he might be describing Jesus, like he might say the door, Jesus is the door, he's the way. That's not really a person either. It's a way of metaphorically describing a person. And so why do you think John would use that specific title to refer to Jesus? What does that mean?
Well,
Do
I
you-
would I would pull from John's Jewishness, and so and far as John's Jewishness, you see several different formulas. It says the word of the Lord came to me, and so that's a reference a lot of times to whenever God gives additional revelation. In Hebrews 1, it says at various times in various ways God spoke through the prophets, but in the last days he refers to his son. So it could be very similar language being used there as well.
All right. And so you say like the word came and he's given this revelation. So we agree here that logos equals some sort of communication. It's some sort of revelation. And then you bring up about how God spoke. So you don't think the Trinity spoke there, right? I mean, it's when it says God spoke, God can't equal Trinity there, right? It's referring
Well,
only to the Father.
it would be the Father because Son is used in the passage.
Okay. All right. Okay. And so we agree that basically word means a communication.
Right.
So then, and so, okay, I'm having trouble figuring out how you're making the connection between calling a person a revelation, because a revelation is of things. It's not a revelation of a person. It's a communication. It's communicating something. What is it communicating?
Right. So let me clarify. The word logos is a thing. Okay. But when we're talking about this thing, we're not talking about words written on a piece of paper. So you were given a metaphorical definition of the word, just as I am. Okay. And now we understand that a word is a communication, but we got to ask him, what way is it a communication? Well, this communication was with God. Well, how could a communication be with God? Well, God must have communicated. Okay. So one argument is that you basically have the idea versus the word. A word is an expression of a thought that's within. In the same way, the Son is an expression of the Father, the exegesis of God,
Okay, the expression of the thought within who?
the Godhead.
Now that's
Do you want me to say Trinity? Is that what you want me to say?
No, I'm just saying the expression within the mind of who, because
It's
again,
just,
when
it's just language. It's just language that relates to procession. The idea that the Father sent the Son, right? And if you hold to eternal subordination, that's not a problem.
Well, these are things you're having to presuppose and read into the text. We're trying to
Right.
extract.
We're both presupposing.
I'm not really. I'm going through the hermeneutical process.
You're presupposing Philo from the very beginning.
I'm not presupposing anything.
You spent more time interpreting Philo than you have the Bible.
No, because it's important to have context when we're interpreting something. That's just part of
the It's important to study a Jew that compromised by mixing Greek philosophy at his time.
That's just an emotional, ideological assertion, baseless
assertion. And that's just an emotional, ideological assertion to bring that out. You're not dealing with the issue. No, why should we listen to a Jewish unbeliever who is borrowing from Platonic philosophy? And we already said that personifications are a result of polytheism.
Yeah, I don't know. They say more ideological arguments. So you're kind of opening a can of worms about who's a believer and these sort of things. But so this expression. So but again, when we this is why it's important to make up our mind whether Yahweh or God ever refers to a Trinity. You're now saying that God refers to a Trinity. So
I'm Trinitarian.
Wait, but if we go back to the Old Testament. So you agree the Old Testament is inspired, and so if each time we read Yahweh or God in the context of creation, it's only referring to one person. In the beginning, God created. No,
that's not what's going on
finish.
there.
I want to finish because
well, you're supposed to be asking questions right now.
I'm going to ask you a question, but okay. So I'm telling you, you gave an answer about, well, it's the Godhead, but you can't demonstrate that. What I'm saying is that it's a singular person each time we read that Yahweh created with his word and with his understanding and with his knowledge and his power. Do you see the difference between that being one person and that being a reference to the Trinity? Do you see the theological implication of which way you understand?
Do you remember when I said that the Trinity is not revealed in the Old Testament?
No, I'm asking you a question. Do you see the theological significance if we see Yahweh as one person or three persons in those specific passages? So we see Yahweh created the heavens and the earth by his mouth, by his word, by his understanding. Singular personal pronouns referring back to one person.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
It does. It matters if it's one person.
No, because all it's doing is emphasizing the speaker.
Yeah, it's like you're saying that the thought developed within multiple persons, but the Old Testament says that it only developed within one person.
No, you're assuming that it's one person.
I'm not. I'm asking you. So do you reject the assertion that when we read in the beginning God or Yahweh created by his word in his mouth, do you reject Trinitarian scholar Murray Harris when he says that can't refer to the Trinity, that it has to refer only to the Father?
Do you understand why he said that, though?
Do you reject it, yes or no?
I do not reject the fact that the Trinity is not revealed in the Old Testament.
Okay. Okay, but you want to answer the question because you've already stated in your rebuttal.
I just answered it.
You already stated in your rebuttal that you haven't looked into the matter. That's okay.
So looked into what matter? What matter are you saying I haven't looked into? Be clear about that.
About what we're talking about here is the
what specifically are we talking about?
In the beginning, God created. cannot be a reference to where we read it in the beginning, the Trinity created. Anytime.
Well, hold on.
that
You
we
said
go
I
back-
didn't look into it. I could talk about a plural of intensity, and I could talk about all of that stuff, and I could talk about the Hebrew and everything. But like I said, the Trinity is not revealed in the Old Testament. I'm a dispensationalist. The church ain't in the Old Testament either. It didn't exist.
All right. So so we read in the beginning God created. Is that a reference to the Trinity or to one person?
The author's intent is not to communicate the Trinity in that passage. It's just referred to the Elohim.
But is now that you're reading it with your presuppositions and
I can't do that. The meaning must you talk about hermeneutics, the meaning must remain stable. I can't change the meaning of the Old Testament.
Yeah, so
it can't mean what it didn't mean back then.
Then you can't maintain fluidity from Old Testament to New Testament, and that's why.
On what basis? On what basis?
On the basis you just claimed you can't do that because it hasn't been revealed yet. And I asked you, well, now reading it with your presuppositions anachronistically, does it refer to the Trinity or one person?
Well, wasn't the Logos concept revealed over time?
Gentlemen, I just want to make sure Andrew's the one asking most of the questions. Clarifying questions are okay, of course, but maybe let's throw it back to Andrew. Feel free to ask the next question. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So let's just move on from there. I think we reached a stalemate with that. And we talk about. I want to talk about the light. I brought up the point about the interpretive dilemma we have there in Genesis 1. And because on the first day of creation, God says, "Let there be light," but we don't see the creation of the light of the sun until verse 4. And so how do you understand the light of day 1 there, especially considering what the evidence I've put forth, and how do you support your understanding of what that light means there?
So typically in Hebrew, it goes verb first and subject, but in 1:2 it goes subject first and verb. So what this is doing, there's a break in the narrative. There's different views about this. You can see the Net Bible if you want a quick rundown of it. But the argument is that it's given a summary statement in 1:1 and then background information describing the conditions, and then the actual creation happens in 1:3. The other thing, as I mentioned already, the light could be the glory of the Lord manifesting. Another argument that could be made, some people may not like this, Hugh Ross makes the argument that there was clouds and stuff that were breaking the natural light that you couldn't see. And so everything's written from a human perspective, looking up at the sky. So there's other options like that. But my point is that the Hebrew allows for a break in the narrative. Some people think that's when Satan fell. Some people think the ice caps melted, and we can speculate about all that stuff.
Let's not.
But what's your point?
Let's not. Because we read about the true light in the Gospel of John, which directly correlates with this interpretive dilemma that we see within the wisdom tradition and in Philo. And so we're reading about the true light. If something is true, like as in aletheia, as in ultimately true, as opposed to something which merely appears to be, what light is John talking about here when he says the true light which enlightens all men? What light is he talking about, and what does that mean exactly?
The glory of the Lord, the glory of the Lord, the revealer, the illuminator. And I would ask you this question: is the word "true" in the Septuagint translation of "let there be light"? It doesn't say "let there be." It doesn't say "let there be true light." So you're arguing for a heightening concept, aren't you?
Sure.
Okay.
But the point is, how do you come to your conclusion? You say it's the glory of the Lord. How do you hermeneutically exegete that out of the prologue of John?
Well, I would basically argue that the sun wasn't created to there, so it doesn't necessarily have to be natural light. Furthermore, I would use the rest of the canon, and in Revelations, it says in the new heavens and new earth, there is no sun because the Lamb will be the light. So it's possible the Lamb was the light before then, and it's going to be like it later on.
So
but there could be a heightening thing.
Yeah. To be clear, the weightiness of what I'm presenting leaps and bounds outweighs what you're presenting. It's very speculative in nature.
That's your assertion. That's your assertion, because this is the thing. Yep. You just made an argument that you said Genesis said let there be light. Then you make the argument true light. Okay. Genesis doesn't say true light. So what you're doing is you're making a heightening argument, which is typological. All right. The problem with that, wait, I want to say this one statement real brief. The problem with that is you're assuming Philo, John is using Philo in the exact same way, but actually John could up it up a notch. In fact, you've already admitted that he did.
I'm asking you what it means, and you're making baseless assertions based on nothing. So
And
when
your
it says
and your
no, let me,
assertions
let me,
are
I'm
let
going
me,
to jump.
your assertions are based on
Gentlemen,
Philo.
I appreciate the passion. I just don't want too much
yeah,
crosstalk, simply because I want to make sure the audience is hearing both
yeah.
sides.
So
So, Andrew,
again,
go ahead. We'll throw it back to you, Charles. Go ahead.
thanks. So when we talk about the true light which enlightens, what does it mean to be enlightened?
To illuminate it, to be
What does
shown
that mean?
truth, to be shown
Okay,
truth.
yeah. So you
The Holy
become
Spirit,
enlightened.
when He comes to convict the world of sin, righteous, of judgment.
I'm not asking how it happens. I'm just asking what it is. What it means to be enlightened. Does it not mean that you gain some sort of knowledge? You become enlightened?
Yeah, well, metaphorically, yes, because
Okay,
otherwise
so
we're talking about light, physical light.
exactly, and that's the contrast, because the intelligible light that was created on day one is the model that served for the sun, just as the sun nourishes the
So
physical life. And
the light is a personification. Is the evil a personification
you
too?
can't ask me questions.
Yeah.
You
Well,
can't.
we're gonna
If you,
find out about that one.
yeah, if we yeah, maybe we can continue some other time. Um, um, So let's see. So again, because we're talking about knowledge, we have this communication. We're talking about information, computation, reasoning that was with God. And then we talk about enlightenment by the light. So it's another form of knowledge is what we're talking about here. And so when we say that no one has ever seen God, we read that. Let's see, that's in verse 18. So I asked this question to someone else in my last debate. I asked him specifically, is Jesus the invisible God? And he says no. So when we talk about no one has ever seen God, who is it that no one has ever seen?
It's God the Father.
Okay, so does it say no one has ever seen the Father? Or does it say no one has ever seen God, period?
It's referring to God the Father. You already granted that inclusio is interpreting John 1. It's in parallel. I put it in color so you could see that.
Okay. So we see the monogenes theos has explained him. Who is the monogenes theos explaining?
It's not the Father.
The monogenes, it says that
there's a person, which I would argue the theos or the Son, that's explaining the God that you can't see.
Yes, explaining. So who is the God you can't see? You already admitted that it's the Father. It's the Father
right.
that you can't see. So you're saying that you can see the Son, though?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have an invisible God character in the whole Bible who Jesus is not the invisible God. He's someone
right.
Who
What's your point?
Okay.
Because he manifested himself in theophanies and Christophanies in the Old Testament. One mediator between God and man. It's in harmony with that. And it's in harmony with him being a messenger or the Logos that represents God.
You asked my point. My point is that if Jesus is not the invisible God, then he's somebody other than the invisible God. And if he's God too, then you have two gods. You have an invisible God and a visible God. So your dynamic there is off. But if it says no, it is. It definitely is. But it says no one. So who is he explaining? He's Jesus. You're saying it's Jesus. I say it's the Logos. The Logos is explaining just one person. Right?
You're confusing ontological versus economic statements.
No, I don't want to hear about presuppositions that you have to read in order to read the text. We're extracting.
Well, we've heard all about yours. You bought Philo's presuppositions. Is there anything you disagree with Philo?
I'm asking you what this text says, just the Gospel of John.
Are you a philologist?
Andrew, we'll make sure Andrew's asking the questions.
Yeah, no, it's no problem. I appreciate that.
No, you guys are doing great. No worries.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I appreciate the passion from Charles. But I'm just talking about this text. So I've walked through this text. It says no one has ever seen God. We agree that that's the Father. And you said, just like Dr. Sean said, that Jesus is not the invisible God. So that's an entire complete God there. If you're an invisible God, it doesn't say invisible person. It says invisible God. And it's saying something or someone has
Are you asking the question? Because when we say that, we're talking about economic-wise. Only the Son manifested himself. Ontologically, he is the invisible God.
This is a presuppositional hermeneutic framework. You're having to force yourself
and you
to
got
read
yours
it because
too. You got yours
really
too.
Don't.
You're just borrowing it from Philo.
I'm using only the text right here.
You're using the text of Philo. Got you.
I said Does it say that no one has ever seen God explicitly in this text? It does.
Yeah, it
and
does
you've
say
admitted
that.
that that's the Father, and you've also admitted that Jesus is not the invisible God. And so whoever or whatever is
It's an
you
economic
gotta let me finish.
distinction.
No, you gotta let me finish, please. You keep it. That's like the fifth time you just asserted economic, and I don't understand the Trinity. I don't accept your presupposition that you read
Well,
the
I
Bible
don't
through.
accept yours.
That's fine, but it's about who can prove what and the weightiness of an argument. So I'm asking you, so whoever or whatever this is has explained only one person. So if Jesus is God and has the same nature of God, didn't he just explain himself? Why does, but anyways, if you want to answer that, you can, but I got another question that I think is important. Where are we at on time?
Good question. So we're at about the 21-minute mark. So we got a solid 4 minutes.
All right, sweet. So let's assume I don't know I don't think it's utterly clear why the logo, like why Jesus or some second person would be called the Logos. But if it is a calculation and it's pointing to an immutable truth through which God created the world, why does all of a sudden the Logos become flesh, and all of a sudden the Logos says, well, when you've seen me, you've actually seen someone else, and my words are not my own. The things that I speak are not my own. Do you not have to presuppose some sort of incarnational giving up of God nature doctrine to explain that?
Do I need to presuppose an incarnation?
No, some sort of incarnation where, like a Philippians 2 situation where, he was God, but he kind of gave that up, but he didn't give that up type of thing. I mean, because what I'm trying to get at is how do you explain if this means ration and this means reason and this is an immutable truth through God, which God made the cosmos? Well, why does Jesus ignorant and then has to grow in wisdom? But that doesn't add up.
Okay, all right. Yeah, no, that's not a problem at all. All right, so first off, I would point out that you have a distinction between the to be verb, eimi, right, and genomai. So ein is being used to refer to his eternal existence, which you've already said the plan was eternal. Then genomai is being used.
That. You keep saying that I said that, and I didn't say that.
Okay, well,
I gave.
You've said it in previous debates. I can't get an exact definition of plan. I got it on my piece of paper. I'm waiting for the explanation. So do you want to clarify that right now? What's your definition of the Logos?
I gave thorough definition in my introduction. This the system of truth, laws, and ideals through which God created the universe. But I also said that it is the polyvalent word of God through which he intercedes and interacts with creation as well. So it's not like you're going to nail it down.
And polyvalent just means multiple meanings, right?
Sure.
So you're just covering yourself because you understand that you're just
talking
about the semantic domain of the word Logos, and you're trying to make it sound so polyvalent. But it's
no, but in the context, I've already said in the context, we're talking about creation and we're talking about immutable truths. So in this context, we're talking about creation and we're talking about immutable truths, just like wisdom, through which God created the cosmos, which are inherent in the cosmos, which are eternal immutable truths. And so the idea that this immutable truth became a man and then became ignorant doesn't follow. So I'll ask you this, just one last question because we're running out of time. How did Jesus grow in wisdom?
In his humanity.
No, how did he? What was the process? Say he's a human like
same
us.
Process you do, except without a sin nature.
Okay, so what process is that? How does one person grow in wisdom?
By knowledge.
Okay, and so you're saying that knowledge became ignorant and had to learn knowledge. Well, where did he learn it from?
So you're going to go.
It's immutable truth. It's teaching you how to grow in immutable truth. It's teaching you how to grow.
You slipped this in at the end of the debate. Well, first off, in the kenosis, he didn't. It's not, as people have pointed out. It's not subtraction; it's addition. Yeah. The word became flesh. Mm-hmm. The word is, if I remember right, it's genomai. It's the same word that says John came baptizing. It refers to a new ministry. So you have the pre-incarnate ministry of Christ, and you have the incarnate ministry of Christ. And for your argument that you have to assume incarnation, what did the mythologists when Athena would appear in Odyssey and stuff like that?
No,
this concept of theophanies and Christophanies has been in existence for a long time. So why would it be so hard to think that God would come human?
So you're saying that because the pagans did it, it's okay that Jesus did it. So
I'm saying they got the idea. They got the
So
idea.
you have to
One
presuppose,
last
like I
question.
said, you have to presuppose a canonic doctrine, like a Philippians 2 like doctrine. You have to presuppose that, because you can't explain how immutable eternal truth became a man and then all of a sudden became ignorant and had to learn again. And so I'm just asking you, what was the process?
The immutable eternal truth, as you call it, never ceased. It didn't become the man and ceasing to be God. That's not what happened.
But Jesus had to grow in wisdom.
In his humanity, what's your point? The hypostatic union is two different natures.
Yes, can you show me in John where that doctrine exists within the
No,
Gospel of John?
I cannot.
Okay,
I cannot.
Thank you.
Yeah, can you show me in Philo where you get everything you believe?
No.
Gentlemen.
Yeah, you can.
So 50 minutes has flown by. Firstly, I want to thank you both for making that fun, engaging, memorable, fast-paced, and professional. So some great questions, great answers, great back and forth. The few times I looked over at the clock, I was thrown off at how quickly it was going by. So good job to the both of you. Clearly, you both have prepped for this, and I appreciate that because it's been an excellent debate. So what we're going to do now is move into closing statements. And so we have 5 minutes each to wrap up our thoughts and wrap up our points for tonight and address anything we feel has been left hanging possibly. So what we'll do is hand it back to Charles. Charles, whenever you're ready, you have a 5-minute closing statement. Just let me know when you're good to go. Unmute, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I'm going to freestyle. Basically, what I argued was that true person existed before personification existed. And so what I'm saying is where he's arguing that it's only a personification, I'm arguing that it's a personification and person. And what I mean by that is that he is assuming that the Logos is not a person. He's saying I'm assuming that he is. Okay, fine. The point is that he makes his basis based on Philo, and he makes all these other philosophical assumptions with that and everything. And there's no reason to go that route. You know, I pointed out that 118 is interpreting 1:1. The God is a person in 118 when it says begotten God or begotten son, whichever textual variant you want to go with. Both of them are defining the word as a person. The reason the word is being used there is because exogenomai is being used there as to declare the righteous. He's the one that declares who God is. He explains him. See, God is invisible in his essence. When I would refer, yes, to that as the Trinity. But the second member of the Trinity economically becomes the visible God, both in the Old Testament and Christophanies, okay? So it makes sense that he would become flesh eventually. You know, of course, Andrew won't believe this, but we can put it this way. God became man in order to do what man failed to do, okay? So that's what we believe. Now, in Genesis 3:15, it says, I will put enmity between your seed and her seed. So we have this vacancy of the seed. And later on in progressive revelation, we find out that the seed would be eternal, would be the Messiah, and all of this. So you have this expectation that's created within Scripture, in prophecy, and then you have this expectation out of Scripture of personifications that exist. And what Jesus does is he says, you know what? I'm all that in a bag of chips. You claim to be the king of the South. I'm talking about in Texas, like there was 2 rappers that were claiming to be the king of the South, but only one of them rightfully had the title. You claim to be the cloud rider. Well, I'm going to take that title from you, dish you in your own rap, and show you what's up. Andrew recognizes the polemic nature of the Gospel of John, and he thinks that this defeats emperor worship. No, by saying Jesus is just a man, what actually defeats emperor worship, if this was true of polemic, would be to say that he's God. This happened in church history with the Sol Invictus, the day of the unconquered sun. It's one of the reasons why, not saying it's right, but it's one of the reasons why December 25th became a prominent day, because the Son of Righteousness of Malachi 4:2 trumped the pagan concepts and everything. See, he's borrowing from Philo and Platonic philosophy to interpret things. When he quotes the Badag, he didn't give me specific passages where the Badag classified these usages. He's given generic classifications. Hasn't told me where they're being used. So this could be from pagan literature. Like I said, the Badag covers classical Greek all the way to early Christian literature. So just because this use is there doesn't mean you can apply it. And so there's the issue with that. Now, I grant that the word logos is a concept. It's a function. This goes into speech act theory, what we're doing with what we're saying. What this logos is doing about performative action, it's acting in a certain way. I've already argued that agency has to deal with a person, not an individual. If they want to cop out to agency, but why don't they just say instrumentation? Why don't they just use another term like that? When they say agency, when State Farm agency comes up, you're talking to a person. You know, we use this language all the time. We'll say in the flesh, the embodiment of something. Look at my name in the dictionary next to procrastination, and you'll see my picture. I am the very model of something. I'm about it. I'm the truth. All right. So you take these external qualities that originally originate in the person of God that have now been misapplied by humans to other inanimate objects. And God takes these perversions and brings them in your face so they bring about a conversion when you see this polemic. So the polemic is not against a Roman emperor and saying, hey, this person is not really God. He's just a man that at some point in his life became the word and some adoptionistic type sense. No, this is the idea that he's the God man, and therefore he triumphs over any other claim to be emperors. When we look at the book of Exodus about the son, the battle between the sons, let my son go versus the Pharaoh's son. If you don't let him go, I'll kill your firstborn. We have this idea, and then we see intertextuality-wise in Hosea, out of Egypt I called forth my son. And this is referring to him. We have the whole language of adoptionistic language in the sense of kings of the Old Testament and stuff, and the order of Melchizedek, and we could go to the eternality of all that. His assumption from the very beginning is that Jesus is just a man. I'm telling you, he's God. God bless.
Thank you, Charles, for that 5-minute concluding statement. Andrew, we're going to hand it over to you now, and you also have 5 minutes. Go ahead. Floor is yours.
All right. Thank you for having me. Thank you for this engaging response, unique, engaging response from Charles. I want to say respectfully, and I mean this truly respectfully, anyone who's listening to Charles in his argument, we have to observe that his argument is all over the place. It's sporadic. It's full of loose ends. It's grasping for little verses here and there, but you can tell that he has not systematically thought these things out, versus what I've presented is a systematic approach where we're looking at the Old Testament, we're looking at the cultural context of the time. We've even examined the grammar, we've examined the text itself, we've worked our way out. Nothing that I've said has contradicted anything in the Bible, and he can't prove it. There's ideological arguments. We have to differentiate between ideological arguments. Well, Jesus had to be God. That's an ideological argument. That's not something that there's nowhere in the Bible where it says Jesus had to be God. There's an ideological argument. Well, he had to be perfect, and he can't do that. That's an ideological argument. It's not an exegetical argument. And you know what? It's for me as a Unitarian, it becomes more fascinating of what Jesus did, because the things that Jesus did were so fascinating that people say he couldn't possibly be human. And so what he did was so incredible. People say, well, he had to be God to do it. That's how incredible it is what Jesus did. So that to me is humbling as a human being, and it makes me appreciate Jesus that much more. And so a few things. In his rebuttal, he brings up this shot about, well, why aren't you Gnostic and this and that? Well, first, being a Gnostic just pertains to knowledge. Yes, if you get to talk about later developments in the aeons and all that stuff, it's crazy. And Paul is speaking about that. But what is Paul speaking about in Colossians? He's saying that there's all these different ways which people try to approach God, through ascetic practices, denying the flesh and things like that, and thinking that they're going to have some revelation of God. And Paul's saying, look, everything that we need is found right here, centrally located bodily in one place in the person of Jesus Christ. And so this ties in again, well, why am I not a Muslim? Well, first of all, the one reason I appreciate Muslims is their dedication to piety and their dedication to doing the will of God as they see it. So, and with all cultures and all truths and all different religions, everybody's vying for what is the will of God. You know, the Hinduism say it's one thing, and the Buddhists say it's one thing, the Muslims say it's one thing, and even Christians might deny about what the will of God is. But this is the intention and the purpose that God wills, which is based on immutable, eternal truths that we should do what is good and we should do what's right, and everything begs the question. And this is interesting leading into the next debate, that Charles holds this once saved, always saved doctrine, which is completely contrary to what the Bible teaches. There's certain immutable truths that man should live in accordance with, and that's how he's correctly labeled a child of God. We read that, I think, in 1 John. Who's the children of the devil or the children of God? Those who do righteousness. So you have to do righteous deeds. Well, how do you know objectively that you're doing righteous deeds? Unless you're doing what is based on the immutable, eternal truths, laws, and ideals through which God created the cosmos. Again, another thing that we'll see from Charles is he has to read all these different presuppositions into the text. And I don't have to do that. I was talking about the text. I was following the hermeneutical spiral. I don't have to have any presuppositional doctrines about which I read it. I'm just trying to understand the text. I think this is overwhelmingly, and I will give Charles the benefit that, you know, I understand that this is out of his element, and that's one of the things we agreed on. You're in my world right now. Anybody watching this, I don't believe that you can challenge what I presented here today, and I don't believe you ever will. If you want to, go ahead. But I agree to go in Charles' world and talk about free grace, something I'm not really too familiar with, but the idea seems very odd that you can just believe in Jesus once and go to heaven. That seems contrary to even the Gospel of John.
Okay, Andrew, thank you so much for that 5-minute closing statement. Gentlemen, we've concluded our opening statements, rebuttals, cross-exam, and our closing statements. So excellent debate so far. I have really enjoyed this. It's been an engaging one, that's for sure. And it makes me that much more excited for, as Andrew pointed out, I do appreciate it, next month's second debate in this series, this time on soteriology, specifically answering the question, is free grace theology biblical? So that should be fun. I'm looking forward to that. Okay, gentlemen, we're now moving into our audience questions. And so how we typically do questions on this channel specifically is whoever the question's for, Andrew, let's say it's for you, you get to respond first, of course. Charles will be able to give some input, and then we'll give you the last word. As that way we can move on. So, okay, let's start from the beginning. We've had some good feedback in the chat. Praise the I am. Appreciate the question. Question for Andrew. Theos has no particle in Matthew 5:9. In this passage saying, is this passage saying we're children of a God or gods, plural?
Yeah, I think it just means there's no article there. And this is one thing that I said in the debate, is that what Philo's presenting there is not some sort of immutable hermeneutical law that we have to interpret the whole Bible for. You know, when we read the Gospel of John in general, it's a very unique book, and especially when we read the prologue, it's a very unique book. And it's so you have two things. Well, am I going to have this dead theology where I got the grammar right and this and that, which my view does not contradict the grammar. It's actually explained by Philo. So do we have this sort of dead theology, or do we have this illuminating theology which helps us understand God and reality better? And the point of the grammar there is to make a theological point, not a grammatical, dogmatic statement.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it. Charles, over to you.
Yeah, well, I can't pull up the Greek text, so the theos has no particle. So children of a god. All right. So if I'm just going by the English right there, children of, I'm assuming the of is genitive. Okay. Well, when if the issue is there is it what is the of a definite article itself, because that could be a factor as well. So the thing is that this is a children of God would probably be a genitive of relationship, and so why do you have gods plural there? I don't understand that, because whether the particle's present or absent doesn't make it plural. It's not children of gods. It's just children of God. Now, if it was theoi, then you would have an argument, or theus if it's the accusative. So I'm not sure where you're going with that praise. You have to show that to me later.
Thank you, Charles. Andrew, you get the last word. Go ahead.
Yeah, a few things. Is well, if say you're well, I don't believe it's children of a god or gods. That's completely contrary to everything that I've said here today. But if you're a children of God, who is God there? That's just one person. You're not a child of the Trinity. You're not a child of Jesus. You're a child of the Father, just like Jesus was. And the thing I would want to ask, and that correlates with what I presented here, and if I would recommend you go back and watch my video on the prologue and for John chapter 3, because I give a good idea about what it means and the how we become children of God and what it means to be a child of God. I think hermeneutically that's a more important question.
Thank you for the last word, Andrew. Next question comes in from Skyo. Question for John, or for Andrew, I'm assuming it's you. In John 17:5, the Greek is para, means to be next to. Does he object?
No, not really, because you have to understand that the prologue is a separate introductory piece of basically statement, which is summarizing what we're about to read. And then, there is a play on where, well, the logos does become animated in this person of Jesus in a rhetorical way. And so in a lot of ways, Jesus is presented as the word and these sort of things. But it doesn't matter, because when we go back to like something like pros being with him, the context determines what they're talking about. And we've seen that wisdom is with God, is a personification of a manifestation. It's not a problem.
Thank you, Andrew. Charles, floor is yours.
Yeah, it means to be next to. Does he object to that? Well, the word just means along, beside of. There's different ways that power can be used, like parachute, paraclete. There's different ways it can be used. But the thing is, it's not the same word as pros in John. You could argue that it's being used in a similar way, but I don't know what your point is, Sky Out.
Thank you, Charles. Andrew, you get the last word. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. But within the context of John 17:3, it's talking about the glory he had before the foundation, which Jesus is asking him to manifest. This is a foreordained glory, which ties into this logos and this blueprint through which God created. And when we go into another cultural context, we see things like the name of the Messiah was already determined 2,000 years, or the Torah and these things were determined 2,000 years before the creation. So I don't really have a point to that, but I think theologically, John 17 is pretty fascinating.
Thank you. Next question comes in from Ashley Myers. Thank you for the question. Question for Andrew. Angels and David didn't accept worship. Jesus accepted worship. Matthew 21, 28, John 20, and every knee will bow to him. Philippians 2:10. If he's not God, then how is it not idol worship? And how does it glorify God? Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to encourage you, Ashley. It's a good question. It's a fair question, because we get caught up in this thing. How if it's like a guilty, you're like, are we committing idolatry when we bow down to Jesus? I want to encourage you, go look at 1 Chronicles 29:20. And we see that David said to the whole assembly, "Bless Yahweh your God," and the assembly blessed Yahweh, the God of their fathers. They bowed their heads, they bowed down, not their heads, I don't know what that interpretation is, but they bowed down, they worshiped God and the king, the human King Solomon, at the same exact time. And Margaret Barker notes that there's one verb of bowing to worship in two direct objects. And so they're prostrating themselves before God and Solomon, and that was not considered idolatry. And likewise, in turn, to bow down to God and to the human Messiah Jesus would not. And within Philippians 2, everything is for the glory of someone else, not for a Trinity. It's only for ultimately, the ultimate glory is for the Father.
Thank you, Andrew. Charles, floor is yours. Oh, Charles, I think you're on.
Yeah.
mute.
Yeah, I think in the book of Revelation, Jesus is worship, but the angels are said, "Hey, don't worship me." So we do see that distinction going on in the text and everything. I still don't honestly know what Andrew believes about Jesus. I don't even know how that works, honestly. So I'm behind the curve on that.
Thank you, Charles. Go ahead, Andrew.
Well, I think it's interesting that, I think, how can you, I don't know how I would determine whether something was true unless I've considered all the options. And so if you've never considered the options, I don't think you can make a definitive truth claim about what's true or not. And we can make something about what's what we have good reason to believe, right? But we have to really consider all the options to see which one is the best one. I don't correlate that angel, didn't want to be worshipped and things like that. I don't think that's a direct. I think that's sort of like respectfully, is kind of like a desperate argument. But I would encourage you. 1 Chronicles 29:20, we see one verb of worship, bowing down, prostrating, probably face down to the ground, to Yahweh and to the human king, and it's not idolatry.
Thank you, Andrew, for the final word. Next one comes in from Pseudonym, $5 super chat. Appreciate it for you, Charles. And he says, you use theos as an argument in the Greek for your position. Can you use your same position to explain 2 Corinthians 4:4? And does it side with Andrew?
Pseudonym, you used a pseudo argument because the definite article is present in that passage. So it's theos. It's not the same thing where the article is absent and a qualitative idea. So the passage talks about the God of this age, the God of this world. Yeah, there's other gods. What's your point? But Paul says if there is so-called gods, he talks about demons and other things like that. So I'm not denying that Elohim or theos can be used for other beings. That's not the issue. So I don't even think Andrew will argue with that. I just wonder if he believes that Satan is an actual personal being or just a personification.
Thank you, Charles. Over to you, Andrew. Floor is yours.
Yeah, as far as the whole evil thing, I mean, you have to separate goodness from Jesus, and you have to separate evil from Satan. I absolutely believe Satan is a real personal being, and I believe that's who's being referenced here. He's called the God of this age, and it is with the definite article. But you're more, of a grammarian than me, and so what you say for right now, I would trust it. But nevertheless, he says the God of the age. And and again, it ties into this whole catachrestic use of the word God and how people and things and angels and all these things can be called God, but there's only one true God. In ultimate reality, there's only one true God, and that's the Father. And so that's good.
Thank you, Andrew. Charles, you get the last word. This one was for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know what else to say. No comment.
Okay. Cool. Let's move on to question for both Bible care and share fellowship. Thank you for the question. Question to both. Who is the us of Genesis 1:26? Anybody want to jump at the opportunity to answer first?
I guess I'm gonna make some Trinitarians mad. I don't know who the us is. You could say, all right, so let us make man in our image. It could refer to the divine council. Some people would say, well, that's saying that image would be angels. Well, you're assuming that angels are not in God's image. You know, that's an assumption that's there. Most people would say that you're talking about a plurality, and Elohim allows for a plurality, a plural of intensity or things like that can be used like that, but I wouldn't argue for the Trinity from that passage.
Okay, thank you, Charles. Andrew, floor is yours.
Yeah, I agree with Charles. I mean, there's many. It's sort of ambiguous, but there's many people a lot of Trinitarian apologists will assert that this refers to a Trinity with no evidence to back that up. But when we follow the line of thinking that in the beginning God created and it speaks about God and it only refers to one person, then we go back to the singular personal pronouns that God made man in his image. We see that there's just one person in mind, and I think it's more important hermeneutically to understand what it means to be made in the image of God, and that means that you are a representative of God on earth. And then we see the Logos and wisdom as the image of God. That means they represent God. If Jesus is the image of God, that means he represents God. And so I think hermeneutically it's more important to understand what it means to be made in the image of God, so you know how to walk in this life rather than speculating about who the us there. But if I had to say definitively, I would say either a plural majesty, but I think it refers more to an announcement to the angelic host.
Thank you, Andrew. Follow up Bible Care and Share Fellowship. He's coming at you, Charles. He says angels don't create. What are your thoughts, Charles?
That doesn't mean they have to create. He gave an example of a passage where they all bowed down and worship, and it meant God and the King. So God can be doing the activity and other people can be watching. It doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is equally involved in the activity. It could be a representative sense. When you talk about the Holy Court, that imagery is possible. Just because there's a solidarity idea does not necessarily mean that everyone is involved in the same way.
Thank you, Charles. Andrew, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's completely unrelated to what we're reading about, because we don't read anything about man being created. Jesus credits his Father and God with creation of the world. It's more of like a speculative. It's a very desperate argument. I wouldn't make that argument. Not even Trinitarian scholars assert that it refers to a Trinity there. Most of them actually deny that it does.
Okay, gentlemen, appreciate the engagement on that question and comment. Next one comes in from Ashley Myers. Appreciate the question. Question for Andrew. What does Emmanuel mean?
That's a good question. It means that God is with us, but the question is, well, what's the dynamic there? Is God number one? Who is God? Right? It just doesn't refer to a Trinity. It doesn't say the Trinity is with us. It's saying one person is with us. So if God is one person and God is with us, and Jesus is God, then Jesus would have to be that one person. Instead, it's metaphoric, just like we read in the book of Luke, I believe, where it says that God has visited his people. A great prophet has risen among them. It's a Hebraism about speaking about God's provision. It's not to be taken literal.
Thank you, Andrew. Charles, go ahead.
Yeah. So what Andrew said about pakad, the Hebrew word for visiting or whatever, it could be used in a positive way, like God's provision, or it could be used in judgment. But Emmanuel, in this particular context of Isaiah, it's referring to the fact that there's going to be a king. The sign is going to show that God is with us. It's interesting that the book of Matthew starts with, he's saying his name should be called Emmanuel. And then the Great Commission says, I will be with you even into the end of the age. So there is an inclusio right there. But you have to know from context, in what sense is he with us? Now, we would say in the ultimate sense that he's with us in the incarnation. But Andrew's absolutely right. Philippians and other passages like that existed before the Gospel of John that should inform our understanding of the Gospel of John in a lot of areas should be taken into consideration for those statements.
Thank you, Charles. Andrew, floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, all in these same contexts. It's a provisional. God's with you in a provisional way. For God so loved the world that He did something and sent somebody else to do something, and this is how God shows His love for us. It's not to be taken. It's not to be taken literally. It's in a provisional sense. We see that word exists in the Old Testament, and so you have to systematically approach these issues and not just take some presupposition you learned in church. I mean that respectfully as possible. And that's just not how you're going to build a sound theology. If that helps you in your faith to walk through your life and brings you peace, it's not, who am I to say what's wrong? But systematically, it's just an erroneous idea that it means that there's some sort of incarnation involved. God is with you in a provisional way.
Okay, thank you for the final word there, Andrew. Next question comes in from Dave. Doesn't specify, but I'm assuming by the question it's for you, Andrew. So let's work through it. Dave, what does it mean when St. Thomas, St. Peter, and St. Paul all refer to Christ as God? Go ahead, Andrew.
Yes, I went through this in my last debate. Is Jesus God in the New Testament? And you see in that book, Murray Harris, Jesus as God. It gives a handful of verses where it could possibly mean that Jesus is God. Half of them he denies that it even refers to Jesus being God. But again, when we get back to that word God, what do we mean by it? Human beings, especially emperors at the time, could be called God. We see the human Messiah, probably David in Psalm 45:6, referred to as God by God. And so that title, we have to understand what we mean by God. Do we mean God, or do we mean the Lord God Almighty, the one who's supremely intelligent, supremely powerful, and whose will is sovereign over all other beings? So he's called God in a sense that human beings could call God. And the contrast in all of those references, like we see our God and Savior, these are all titles that were applied to human emperors at the time. And these weren't incarnations of gods. The contrast is saying, no, these are not the true kings. Jesus is the true king who could be called God, just like Psalm 45:6, in contrast with these other human kings.
Thank you, Andrew. Charles, floor is yours. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the quote, it says the word theos occurs 1,315 times in the Greek New Testament, primarily as a title for God the Father. Harris believes that of the 15 possible uses of theos as a title for Christ, only 7 are actually so used. He concludes that theos is definitely used of Christ in John 1:1 and 20:28. Very probably in Romans 9:5, Titus 2:13, Hebrews 1:8, and 2 Peter 1:1. Probably in John 1:18, and possibly but not likely in Acts 20:28, Hebrews 1:9, and 1 John 5:20.
Thank you, Charles. Andrew, final thoughts?
Well, if he thinks it refers to Jesus in Hebrews 1:9 as a reference back to Psalm 45:6, where it's applied to the human Messiah, and anytime, fine, you think it refers to Jesus in 1:1, but that's a baseless assertion. He doesn't systematically approach the issue hermeneutically, giving all sort of context or any sort of substance that you can apply to your life or any way you can understand God. He just makes this sort of dead theological, grammatical claim that it does. Okay, he does. Okay, well, what are you going to do with that information? No, it's just not going to do anything for you. Instead, ask yourself, what is the logos? Go back, listen to what I've said, and you feel free to tell me why it's wrong.
Can I push back a little real quick?
Yeah, if you want to push back, then we'll throw it back to Andrew after for the last word, though, because it is his question.
Well, Andrew, you asserted about the human Messiah, but according to the Davidic covenant, that the covenant would be eternal. So the only way that could happen is if the one that sits on the throne is eternal, or the Davidic covenant is preserved eternally. So which one do you hold to?
Well, this is how you approach time, because something can be. We're talking about eternity forward. We're not saying that because David has an eternal, he is given some sort of eternal throne backwards, and that doesn't add
So
up.
Jesus, the man, is eternal forward.
I mean, he is the Messiah for eternity. I mean, yeah, he's God. Yeah, What's wrong with that?
Okay, I'm just getting your understanding of it. Thank you.
If you'd like a quick final word, Andrew, go ahead.
No, yeah, I think, it's interesting. Like, imagine going back and reading the Bible and saying that God came from the line of David. That's just odd. I mean, it could be an ideological argument. Well, how does God come from David? And you could explain it with the sort of presuppositional hermeneutic framework. But yeah, the whole idea, it's what's so amazing about Jesus is he was a human. The things he did was so amazing that people deny the fact he could possibly be human. I think that's more amazing. So more amazing that he did what he did if he was human than if he was God. And you have to admit that because you say that what he did is so amazing that he had to be God to do it.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay, another super chat follow-up from Pseudonym. First one was for you, Charles, so I'm guessing this one is for you as well. He says, interesting, I agree the logos may be a feminine personification, though Charles debunked him. So it's my standalone question. Why in our image is there male and female when if both males, there's females? Could be a question for the both of you. I'm not too sure. Charles, let's start with you.
I have the gift of interpreting pseudonym, okay? So, number one, logos is a masculine word, okay? If you want to go with feminine, you would go with Sophia or something like that. Number two, grammatical gender and sexuality are not the same thing, all right? But the passage that you're talking about, let us make man in our image, he created him male and female. The image is both male and female. So you could talk about, people use the term masculine and feminine characteristics, or now the term is expressive versus instrumental. But regardless of that, it's just talking about the different roles by which it's manifested. So I don't know how you tie that to the logos, but I'll let Andrew go where he wants with all that.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, so first, I would always just start to ask, what does it mean as a human being to be made in the image of God? It's one of the most profound things that we read in the Bible that's completely unique to Judeo-Christianity. The idea is that God created the entire world, and he placed man in the world as his representative. So every human being, their ideal role, the role that you are, your identification is that you're made in the image of God. You are a representative of God. That's the first point. Now, if we go back to the logos, and so I will say that the Jewish people around that time, rabbinics, theologians, and even Philo talked about the image of God being an ideal archetype of a human being, so that Adam was made essentially through an archetype of an ideal archetype of what a human being should be. The biblical story is that Adam lost that by disobeying God's order, and that through Christ, everything is being reconciled back to its original state. And that our goal as human beings is to have that so essentially what they call Adamic glory being restored, is that original glory that we've lost, that we should get back. So it's kind of a complicated thing, but yeah.
Is it back to me?
Yes, go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, so image, I agree, deals with representation. And that's my whole point. Jesus Christ is the truest, most purest form of representation, because the way that he represented was in the flesh. God in the flesh represented. And so that's how I view that. That's what I mean about the personification. The purest form of personification is a person.
Okay, gentlemen, that we've come to the end of our Q&A. Lots of great questions, lots of interesting questions. So I appreciate Andrew and Charles, the way you engage them. And so that wraps up the debate. This has been a great professional debate on a very interesting and important topic. Of course, Andrew, Charles, I appreciate the time you've given to us for this debate, but also the time you both put into preparing for it. And so let's get some quick final words, final thoughts before we wrap things up for tonight. Charles, let's start with you again. Thank you for doing this. Final words, final thoughts.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you for this experience. Thank you, SFT. I've studied this stuff over the years, but I mean, this is my first formal debate on it, and I tried some arguments. I didn't want to just go at it the way the other people done it, because I thought the real issue is can we have personification but also person? And I think we can. He says he can't, but that's up to that. Anyway, he might have got me in this one, but I think I'll do a lot better. I'm going to come back as the Jordan with the 4-5 jersey in that free grace debate. So God bless.
All right. Thank you, Charles, for the final words, final thoughts. For those that want to see more from Charles, do please check the description box for a link to his channel, the Layman Seminary. Charles, are you having an after show? Is what I hear people talking about in the chat, in the live chat.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Andrew Griffin, great to have you here for the first time. Great debate. I appreciate the time you've given to this, and I look forward to having you on more times in the future. So any final words, final thoughts, Andrew?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate hearing that I'm still welcome as a heretic, But I'm honored to be on this show. I think I saw an interview you did with Dr. Frank Turek, who getting into theology, he was a big inspiration of mine, along with Ravi Zacharias. And one of the things that he made about the evidence of how we know God exists is because there's order in the cosmos. And this is the idea about the Logos, is that you cannot see God, but you can see his order, which is an image of his person. And that by understanding that order, we can understand the character of God. And this is an interpretation that maintains fluidity within the Gospel of John. This Logos explains God, and it becomes flesh, and Jesus continues to explain God. And so I appreciate being here on this channel. I think it's like, for me, it's like a monument. It's like a highlight of everything that I've done. And I really love the channel, and I appreciate it very much. I'm looking forward to the next debate very much.
Absolutely. Andrew, I appreciate those kind words, and a shout out to my interview with Dr. Frank Turek. And for those that want to see more from Andrew, your channel as well is linked in the description box for people to check out. Your channel name's Unitarian Apologetics, right?
Yes.
Yes. So that is linked for people to see. And if you enjoyed tonight's debate, which I did greatly, then you will also enjoy next month's debate. This time, we're entering the debate dojo in the world of soteriology. Is free grace biblical? Charles Jennings, Andrew Griffin, as you can tell, they come fully prepped for these debates. And so I'm sure that'll be another one to remember. Okay, gentlemen, you both have given me nearly 3 hours of your time. So I am going to let you guys get out of here for the night. I'm going to stick around just for a few minutes and go over some reminders and announcements. And so, okay, have a great night. Andrew, we'll talk soon. And Charles, we'll talk soon as well. All right, there we go, guys. Another one in the books. It's been just an excellent year of debates, and I think we're ending the year with a bang, as we have a solid mix of events for December as we slowly move towards Christmas, which I'm excited for, the great Christmas debate. So we're going to have this next week, CJ Cox and Carlos Xavier. So two experienced, seasoned debaters, and they're going to be debating the interesting question, is Christmas Christian? I see on Facebook, YouTube, this is a controversial question. And so I think it's pretty cool that we get to host a debate on this question right before Christmas. So, and then we'll be having, to wrap up the year, a couple more main events. For example, here we've got a soteriology showdown. Two experienced debaters, Charles Jennings, who is just here tonight, and Sean Griffin, is free grace theology biblical. So this is going to be a debate you definitely don't want to miss out on. So hit the notification bell. We did just hit 21.5 thousand subscribers. And so praise the Lord. This is a listener supported ministry, and we want to do everything we can to top 2023 in 2024. It's not going to be easy to do. We were hosting on average about 4 to 5 events a week, sometimes multiple main events in 1 week. We just finished our annual conference. We had 11 speakers, 10 shows. It's been really just an epic year of soteriology debates, open mics, creation evolution debates, nature of God, just debates on all sorts of topics. We did a ton of debates on dispensationalism and eschatology. And so we really, really want to top 2023 and 2024. And we can only do that with the support of our listeners. And so for just $1 a month, you can become a Standing for Truth patron. I do have that linked. We're looking for more patrons. We're looking for more support if it's on your heart. And the reason why is because we want to get as many guests as we can for 2024, and that includes well-known guests. And so with your support, we can get all of the guests in the world, all of your favorite debaters, apologists, and so on. And we can really have another year to remember, guys. And I'm excited. January, we're going to kick off the year with some pretty big debates. One at the end of January. I'm pumped for this one. I've definitely wanted to see this debate on this specific topic for a while. And so we've got the great Trinity debate. Does the Bible teach the doctrine of the Trinity? Sean Griffin, Anthony Rogers, two powerhouses in the debate world, both very well known and well studied on this respective topic. So I'm pumped. This is going to be January 29th. You're not going to want to miss out on this one. Anthony and Sean are doing a two-part debate series. Who knows, might turn into a trilogy for all I know. Round one will be on the gospel truth, and round two, which is more on a general topic, so I'm pumped for this one. Does the Bible teach the doctrine of the Trinity? Again, this is January 29th, a day after my birthday. So happy birthday to me. This is going to be great. Next week, we've also got the great millennium debate. Premillennialism versus amillennialism. Phelan McFallon versus Dr. Sam Frost. This will be here in no time. And we've got some eschatology, more eschatology debates coming up too, to wrap up. Actually, no, to start January, we got two. With Scott Clem, he'll be debating full preterism with Dr. William Bell. And he and Kirby Tabb, pastors Kirby Tabb and Scott Clem, they'll be engaging the Olivet Discourse, the great Matthew 24 debate. And so this will be in January as well. I'm also in the midst of confirming a few more on evolution, as we will be continuing our open mic evolution debate challenge series into 2024. And I'm in talks with several people in doing some open mic debate challenges, one specifically on the heat problem, which I am extremely excited for. We'll be challenging the entire evolutionary community on that one. We've got another one here in January, Deity of Christ debate. Is Jesus Yahweh? Praise I Am versus Sean Griffin. So as you can tell, this is just a snapshot of what we got for you. Lots to look forward to, including tomorrow. We're going to be wrapping up the week with yet another debate. This one, Georgios Antonios versus David Preston. Galatians 2:7. How many gospels? Is the gospel of the circumcision and uncircumcision the same? And so make sure you're here for that Saturday night showdown. Again, that's just a snapshot of the overall material we have for you. It is my goal to top 2024. We want to top 2023 in 2024, and we can only do that with your help as well. Of course, we have a team, and we are blessed to have the best audience on YouTube. And so with that, we are going to wrap things up. Share this content around. If you're not yet subscribed, make sure to hit that subscribe button, and also make sure to hit that like button, as it really does help with the algorithm. And so God bless all. Standing for Truth is out.